Hey everyone, Diavolo here, and in today's video, we are back for the final and just most amazing section of JoJolion so far, the Wonder of You. This section is hype cubed. The interconnecting storylines and betrayals that happen throughout this part is just sublime. Araki was truly in his bag when he crafted the final few arcs of this section of JoJo's, a pure masterpiece in subverting the reader's expectations and confusing the hell out of them with the most calamitous of all stands ever seen. As said, this is the Wonder of You. So of course, sit back, grab a snack, leave a like if you end up enjoying my video, and forget all about your issues as we delve into the final section of JoJolion. Following the brutal deaths of Urban Gorilla and his pet, Josuke, Rai and Yasuo make their descent down the mountain, heading back towards the parking lot. As Josuke wanders slightly ahead of the group, Rai suddenly pulls Yasuo aside and praises her quick thinking on the mountain, saying he won't call her a hindrance anymore, but his tone quickly changes. He bluntly tells her to go back home to Morio. Rai's harsh rejection strikes a deep sensitive chord within Yasuo, and she randomly starts to recall a moment years earlier at the Kotodai flea market. Their memories take us all the way back to the year of 2005, where Yasuo, while wandering through a local flea market, spotted a hair clip that sparked her interest, and she instantly bought it on the spot. Back home, she tried showing off the purchase to her mother, but was met with nothing but cold indifference. In truth, the young girl was just desperate to look pretty for an upcoming weekend reunion with her father. Her parents divorced at 10, with her staying with her mum in Morio while her father had moved to Yamagata. After rolling up to school the next day and seeing her friends give someone gifts, Yasuo realizes that she was the only one who forgot to get her classmate's birthday. The petty oversight quickly made her unpopular among her peers, and the intense psychological distress of being ostracized apparently triggered a severe scalp condition, causing her skin to flake and shed aggressive amounts of dandruff. Wishing to look absolutely flawless for her father, Yasuo began treating her scalp with a potent prescription medicine, which works wonders. During the same morning and unable to find her hair clip, Yasuo started rummaging through all of the house drawers. She frantically tore apart the room, her anxiety spiking as she flies into a blind rage. She fiercely demands to know what her mother did with it, and even accuses her of throwing the clip away out of pure spite. Terrified and crying, Yasuo tries to sprint out of the apartments, but her mother grabs her hand to stop her. All of a sudden, the skin on Yasuo's hand flakes off, causing her mother's hand to slip. The sudden loss of tension sent Yasuo shooting forwards, causing her to crack her skull on the stairs balustrade. Lying knocked out on the floor, the true reason behind this bizarre skin condition rolls out and reveals itself. Turns out, the hair clip wasn't exactly a hair clip, but a stand-like bipedal creature. Hitting pure demon mode, this tiny stand slithered back into Yasuo's hair and stabbed her scalp, restarting the previous halted dandruff. When Yasuo finally woke up, she was stunned to find her father sitting right beside her. He lets her know that he got the rundown from her mother and compliments her beautiful hair clip. He goes to give it back to her when the warmth in his voice vanishes. He coldly reveals that he wouldn't be spending his Sundays with her anymore. You see, dude's a complete ass and wants to spend more time with his new lover, someone he intends to start a brand new family with. Getting up, utterly heartbroken, Yasuo mumbles out that she isn't feeling well and needs to go to the bathroom. Her father goes to ask if she's alright when his face cracks and body starts to full on disintegrate in front of her. In reality, the cruel rock animal had manifested a shifting illusion just to torment her spirit. When Suzuo finally returned home to the house with medical help, she found an eerily quiet living room. Entering the hallway, she checks each room before finally finding Yasuo slumped in the bathtub, her wrists slit in a desperate attempt to meet Yamayugi. Fading back into the present day, Yasuo admits that back at the War Eyes when Josuke crawled his ass out, she had no idea what was going on. For some otherwise inexplicable reason, she saved a naked, nameless stranger buried in the dirt. She doesn't know why she acted the way she did back then, but she remembered something very important, that there isn't anything that should be overlooked. Flashing back to the day of her Kermicide attempt, Yasuo had been rushed to the local hospital. As she lay recovering in her room, the doctor, which of course is Holly, girl seems to be the only doctor in town, carefully read her diagnostic chart. Seeing Yasuo just laying there, Holly quietly approached. She got in behind her and softly whispered the exact quote Yasuo had said before. The meaning behind it, according to Holly, was that if there's something important to see and you only look at yourself, you won't be able to see it. Mere moments later, a young carer entered Yasuo's room, politely apologizing for his mother's odd behavior. He held out the fragments of her missing hair clip, explaining that he accidentally stepped on it in the hallway, coincidentally crushing the parasitic rock animal to death and breaking its curse at the same time. He offered a brief, quiet apology for breaking her item, before leaving the broken clip by her side. Due to how cooked she was at the time, Yasuo never got a clear look at Kira's face and didn't realize it was even him. But standing on the mountainside in the present day, the memory finally becomes crystal clear. Yasuo now understands with absolute certainty that she met Kira and it was only for a brief moment, but she's sure the doctor was Holly. Ever since that hospital visit, she had been subconsciously searching for that important something Holly had told her about. In her mind, pulling Josuke out of the dirt was far more than just saving a stranger's life. It was the moment she saved herself. Dramatically, Yasuo exclaims that her life goals are now identical to Josuke's, making it unequivocally clear that whether the appraiser likes it or not, she is coming along to the very end. Thoroughly bored by the emotional display, kind of hilarious that, this massive backstory was used just to link up, some sort of relationship between Holly and, I guess the Kira lineage. Rai stops listening to Yasuo's speech, turning instead to join Josuke further down the mountain. I love Rai, dude was just like, yeah, cool, I do not care. Far below them though, inside the quiet orchard of the Higashikata estate, Jobin starts digging a hole with a knife. Love the dual-purpose knife? Anyway, he kneels silently in the dirt, carefully burying poor Tom's lethal Lego house, sealing the fate of everyone on the mountain. 12 days, 4 hours, and 33 minutes. That is all the time that remains between now and when the boys will be able to harvest the new Lokakaka fruit. Back at the Higashikatas, Nodosuke bumps his foot against an unknown bag in the middle of the corridor and asks whose it is. Spotting Jobin crawling his way out from inside his goon cave, Nodosuke is quickly distracted by Jobin's unusually early rise. Moving forward, he makes his way over to the dining table where he spots Joshu rubbing up a few glizzies. Curious, he asks Joshu what he's doing, and turns out dude has become suspicious of how they're packing the new fish sausage value packs. In order to determine whether or not the value sausages had their original weight changed, he now examines every single sausage individually to determine whether they're smaller than usual. Freaking out though, Joshu turns to notice that his sisters are already gobbling on his unmeasured sausages and demands to know how many they've already smashed back. Not wanting anything to do with some sausages, Jobin quietly leaves the scene to check the surveillance cameras in the laundry, where the family's video feed can be closely monitored. As he walks, he reminisces about a specific day spent at the local baseball stadium with his father years ago. He mentions his frustrations at not being able to secure better seats from the stadium staff, comparing it to the upscale Trasadi restaurant which had flatly refused to book them a table because they were already completely full. Norosuke tries to correct his son's entitled attitude, but Jobin pushes back, explaining that the family business is facing serious danger from growing competition. When Jobin proposes a solution, expanding their trade to mainstream products like imported olive oils or mass-produced fruit goods, Norosuke categorically refuses. He argues that shifting to commercial goods would completely ruin the artisanal spirit of their legacy, and ends the discussion by simply walking away. Frustrated and abandoned, Jobin boils with anger at the thought of being permanently stuck at the exact same social standing as everyone else. But, right at that moment of vulnerability, the young man is accosted by Yotsuyu Yagiyama, whom Jobin only vaguely recognizes from town. The architect smooth talks Jobin, inviting him out for a drink of incredibly expensive wine alongside his own shady companions, Aisho Danijiyama and the Aphex brothers. Cutting back to the present, there is exactly 12 days, 2 hours and 11 minutes before the final harvest. Josuke and Rai sneak onto the Higashikata estate through the dark underground corridors. Josuke warns that the rock humans already know about these passages, but Rai remains confident, unveiling a completely different, highly classified tunnel used to cultivate and harvest special products, a secret only known to himself and Nodosuke. As they navigate the narrow passage, Josuke asks where Yasuo went. Having made the plan with her, Rai explains that she went back to her house to investigate the broken hairpin from her childhood. She suspects that it is a rock animal and hopes analysing the components of its corpse will provide them with some sort of clue. It may even be one that could lead directly to the identity of these rock humans. Emerging out of the other side of the bunker now, Rai and Josuke carefully peek out to observe the surrounding trees. Being the botany god, Rai spots the branch and points directly towards a seemingly ordinary tree, indicating that the grafted branch is on the second tree from the right. Josuke looks on in confusion, completely unable to tell the individual trees apart. Pulling out one of the tubes, Rai carefully takes the specialized moth larvae in his hand, then uses doggy style to launch his unraveled arm across the clearing, gently depositing the larvae onto the branch. With the deed accomplished, Rai snaps the hidden hatch shut, announcing that a small fruit will grow in just 2 full days, and that they must go into hiding until it's ready. Meanwhile, back in the laundry room, Jobin ponders the situation, wondering how poor Tom is surveying the land. He isn't sure what the hell the thing is that he buried, but is absolutely certain that if Josuke and the appraiser gets within its range, they'll die. Now, with 12 days, 2 hours, and 2 minutes before the harvest, Tsurugi looks up and asks his father about the toy he had seen him bury beneath the orchard. Jobin instantly snaps, angrily demanding to know how long he'd been watching and if he stepped foot inside of the orchard. Tsurugi quickly defends himself, claiming he only saw him from the nearby fence. Softening his tone, Jobin tells Tsurugi to close the door and quietly explains that soon he will fall ill with the family curse, just as he did as a child. He reminds his son that the only person who made him better back then was his mother, Kaito. Like his mother, Jobin solemnly swears that when the day comes for Tsurugi's rock disease to trigger, he will be the one to cure him, and that he buried that toy specifically for his own survival. Tsurugi asks if his father has done something bad, but the conversation is violently cut short when the sound of a gas tank right next to them starts to implode like some sort of ocean gate craft. In an instant, Jobin's nose begins to bleed and his ears throb with intense pain. Clutching his own dome, Tsurugi's head rings with the exact same pressure, while Iwasuke cries out in pure agony, frantically scratching at the door to escape the room. Looking out the window, Jobin sees nothing at all. However, all of the sealed containers inside of the room continue to violently implode. Seeing Tsurugi swing the door open, Jobin barks a warning at him to not leave, but it's already too late. Tsurugi exits, stepping right into the path of Ozone Baby's misshapen, terrifying true form. Instantly getting hit by the stand's force, Iwasuke cries out, bleeding heavily from all of his orifices, including his eyes and ears, as he collapses to the ground. Unable to do anything himself, Jobin can only watch as the same lethal pressure begins to take hold of his son. Desperate to save his son, Jobin steps outside of the laundry room shed to reach Tsurugi, but the moment he crosses the threshold, he falls directly under Ozone Baby's lethal influence. As the air is forcefully dragged from his lungs, Jobin realizes that this sudden trauma isn't the result of a poison or a biological disease. The attack was triggered mechanically the exact second he left the sealed environment of the shed. Thinking quickly and knowing he needs to get back into the safety of the shed, Jobin uses the last of his strength to force his body up and touch the car. Instantly summoning his stand, he uses precise thermal manipulation to start the car and uses the force from its movement to throw his own body back through the door of the shed. Once inside, Jobin slams the door shut and immediately notices that his lungs can expand again. With this realization, he understands exactly how poor Tom's ability works. Anyone who opens any sealed space within its radius will trigger an immediate, lethal decompression for everyone inside. While Jobin curses his horrific predicament, the trap springs on the other side of the estate. Deep within the underground tunnel, Josuke and Rai suddenly begin to suffer the exact same severe decompression. Noticing their sudden nosebleeds and splitting headaches, they immediately deduce that an enemy stand is actively targeting them. However, they misinterpret the mechanics of the attack and mistakenly assume their only option is to open a nearby hatch and escape the suffocating tunnels. Back in the shed, Jobin continues to unravel the subtle, mechanical rules of Ozone Baby. The door acts as a sort of barrier, slowing down the depressurization, but if it's opened, they undergo sudden depressurization, causing all of the air inside of them to swell up. Freezing in place, Jobin watches as the goofy-looking stand begins to appear behind him. Acting on pure survival instinct, Jobin orders Speed King to unleash a barrage of punches, but the strikes pass completely through the enemy stand as if it were a ghost. Feeling the room's atmospheric pressure begin to plummet once again, Jobin abandons the useless assault to focus entirely on saving his dying son. I did kind of word it wrong, but he did manage to grab him before the car flicked him into the room there. Using his medical and chemical knowledge, he quickly manufactures a makeshift oxygen tank and breather. By using Speed King to rapidly heat bleach inside of a container and routing the vapor through a tube placed in a water bottle, he creates a crude life-saving respirator. Tsurugi slowly regains consciousness under the mask, groggily looking up to ask his father what his secret connection to the enemy syndicate really is. Not answering it completely, Jobin instead explains that his vision for the future completely clashes with the safe, passive traditions of Norisuke. That being said, he swears to his son that he will find the ultimate cure to the Higishikata's family rock disease no matter what lines he has to cross, openly stating his intent to eliminate poor Tom and keep the power of the Lokaka entirely for themselves. Sensing that Josuke and his plant appraiser ally must be hiding somewhere out in the garden, Jobin plans to let them take the brunt of the enemy's assault in order to turn the tables and secure his own victory. While Jobin and Tsurugi remain tightly sealed inside of their storage shed, the rest of the family is systematically targeted. Just outside their threshold, Daya and Hato lay completely unconscious on the ground. The sisters had actually heard the violent commotion from inside of the house and opened the storage door room to investigate, instantly suffering the full devastating brunt of Ozone Baby's crushing pressure themselves. It is kind of crazy that, Sudoku decides to just close the door on them and not pull them in. Anyways, and correctly assuming that the same exact fate has already befallen his father and Joshu, Jobin locks eyes with Sudoku. He apologizes for roping him into this and doesn't mind if he changes his opinion of him, but this is all for the family. He questions if he believes him, and Sudoku says he does. Using this, Jobin states that their only hope of survival is to figure out a way to kill poor Tom. He carefully breaks down the lethal physics of exposing oneself to atmospheric pressure by using water pressure as an example. Knowing that they will probably reach the pressure limit of 21 atmospheres in just a few minutes, Jobin devises a remote-controlled plan that will allow the two of them to strike back without ever leaving the safety of their sealed shelter. Miles away from here, an oblivious poor Tom is lounging at the home of the luxury car driver he met in the parking lot earlier that day. Suddenly, the woman's cell phone rings. She blindly passes the device over to poor Tom, who casually answers the line, only for his smug expression to shatter. On the other end is Jobin holding up his camera feed to show the Higashikata orchard engulfed in roaring, violent flames. Panicking at the sight of the plant possibly burning, poor Tom abruptly abandons the woman and sprints out of the door. Watching the blaze grow from inside of the shed, Sudoku cries out that the fruit will burn to ash, but Jobin remains perfectly calm. He explains to his son that the impending doom of the branch is a calculated gamble, one that will forcefully spur every faction into immediate desperate action. To fan the flames, Jobin instructs his son to fold an origami fire truck, which he heavily soaks in kerosene. When that same small fire truck gets close enough to the inferno, he sets it ablaze, fueling the destructive wildfire from afar. With the bait laid out, Jobin then sits back in the shadows, waiting to see how Josuke and the plant appraiser will respond to the fire. Meanwhile, deep within the subterranean bunker, Josuke and Rai continue to suffer agonizing pain from Ozone Baby's depressing aura. As the ears ring, Rai frantically commands Josuke to snap the hatch shut to reseal their environment, but Josuke pushes back, arguing that the enemy must be waiting right outside the door, actively tracking their exact coordinates. Rai tries correcting him, reminding our boy that this underground tunnel is a tightly guarded secret known only to a select few. The enemy has no idea where the fruit is yet, and this isn't a direct attack, but rather an automated one set up for anyone who enters its range. Letting an eye on the situation, Josuke peeks through a tiny porthole on the exit, only to stare in utter astonishment as a massive fire tears through the orchard. Rai takes a peek himself and can see the branch is fine for now, but the orchard will burn completely to the ground at this rate. Showing up in front of Josuke, the same apparition of ozone appears. He swings at it, causing the ghostly figure to dissipate, just like it did with Jobin. This causes Josuke's mind to race, and he guesses that what the enemy is trying to do is lure the two of them out into the open to slaughter them. Back in the shed, Jobin gently reassures a weeping Sudoku that Iwasuke is resilient and will survive, as he probably turned himself to stone. Coming up with a plan, he asks his kid to fold another origami shape capable of taking flight. At that exact moment, Josuke makes a high-stakes decision to breach the surface. He summons Soft and Wet, deploying a dense layer of specialized bubbles around his body to act as a pressurized shield to stave off the crushing weight of decompression. Rai reminds him that if he does this, the location of the branch will be leaked, and he could instead abandon the property for now with him in an attempt to escape the user's range. Disregarding his suggestion though, Josuke fiercely reaffirms his unbreakable goal to secure the fruit in order to save Holly. In his eyes, if Norisuke gets the fruit, it will open up the righteous path for them all. Not overly stoked with Josuke's decision and how if the bubble pops, he will die, Josuke decides to share the bubble with Rai. He repeats his goal of going over, grabbing the branch, and then escaping, but Rai tells him to chill. He isn't overhyped with the plan, but he likes what he said earlier about Norisuke, so instead of Josuke putting his own life on the line, Rai decides to step outside first in order to quickly snag the plant. Strolling calmly through the distorted orchard, the master appraiser mutters that the ultra-fragile branch must be handled with absolute care. Since the bugs have entered the branch, it has to be broken off in a way that they won't die, and he alone possesses the expertise to safely do that. From inside the shed, Jobin and Sudoku intently watch the live feed through a smartphone that Sudoku had seamlessly transformed into a soaring origami crane. At the same time, Rai approaches the target tree and slowly lifts his arm, preparing to cleanly slice the graft away from the trunk. But just as he goes to unravel his fingers, Rai suddenly freezes, his eyes darting sharply to the side. Confused, Josuke wonders what the hell he's doing and why he's now looking in the wrong direction. Emerging from the shrubbery next to Rai is poor Tom, who had successfully snuck back into the garden, his hands tightly gripping his miniature Lego house. Having confirmed his suspicions about the locator car's exact coordinates, the old man looks up at the appraiser, telling him he has a final life or death choice to make. Making a split-second lethal calculation, Ryan unleashes doggy style. He uses both of his unraveled arms simultaneously, using one arm to quickly seize the branch while rocking his other arm across the clearing to tightly bind poor Tom in a web of razor-sharp wire rope. To truly understand the unyielding resolve of the man standing in this burning orchard, we have to take a look back at the early life of Rai Mamazuku. When he was just a child, his parents were master botanists who cultivated legendary, prized high-class pears, crops so flawless they would routinely sell for millions of yen. However, their revolutionary growing techniques were eventually leaked to the public. Exploiting this vulnerability, a ruthless competitor tied to underground moneylenders completely ravaged his parents' orchard, systematically ruining their livelihood and forcing them to sell their ancestral land. Unable to forgive what he saw as his parents' weak-willed incompetence, a young Rai chose to seclude himself entirely on a harsh mountain slope. Against all odds, he mastered the unforgiving climate, learning to cultivate world-class fruits in the wild before eventually catching the attention of Norisuke Higashikata IV and becoming his most trusted, secret business partner. Back in the grim reality of the present day, Josuke Higashikata watches from the fringes of the burning garden as Rai uses his unraveled form to viciously strangle poor Tom while also desperately trying to maintain his grip on the precious locator car branch. Rai tightens the wire mesh around Tom's neck, bluntly threatening to snap his spine then and there. Lamenting the sheer pathetic nature of his predicament, a choking poor Tom nonetheless smiles, boldly declaring his ultimate victory. In a horrific instant, Rai's face violently caves in and his internal organs begin to collapse in on themselves. The old man wheezes out the final, lethal rule of his stand. Anyone who dares to make direct physical contact with his body faces the absolute, concentrated brunt of Ozone Baby's crushing pressure. With his body completely crushed from the inside out, Rai collapses helplessly to the dirt. Refusing to let their ally fall alone, Josuke rushes forward into the fray. Remembering Rai's highly specific botanical lecture from earlier regarding the lethal toxicity of yew seeds, Josuke instantly encapsulates a cluster of the deadly seeds inside Soft and Wet's bubbles, firing the projectiles directly at the old man. As the spheres close the distance, Josuke's bubbles pop due to the pressure around poor Tom, propelling the poisonous seeds directly into poor Tom's mouth, which had been forcefully pried open by the parting remnants of Rai's doggy style. Forced to swallow the lethal toxin, a panicked poor Tom pulls out a survival knife, but unexpectedly tosses the blade aside. Instead, what he was truly wanting was the sheath. He brandishes the hollow sheath, pressing Rai's tension wire deep inside the column to artificially simulate a tightly closed space. The localized pressure inside of the wire increases exponentially, and with a sickening pop, Rai's head bursts under the sheer atmospheric weight, the botany god falling completely limp, seemingly dead on the spot. From the hidden vantage point inside of the laundry shed, a stunned Jobin and Tsurugi watch the horrific feedback on their monitors, quietly noting the plant appraiser's apparent demise. Unwavering, Josuke continues his aggressive march towards poor Tom, but with every single step he takes closer to the rock human, the crushing decompression forces waves of splitting pain through his skull. Still heavily poisoned by the swallowed yew seeds and coughing up violently, poor Tom ignores the agony, gloating triumphantly as his fingers finally wrap around the prized locator car branch. Scrambling up a steep rock formation to escape the burning orchard fire, Tom suddenly hears the echoing, distant signs of a fire engine piercing through the smoke. He quickly deduces that a specialized medical ambulance from the university hospital will undoubtedly be trailing right behind the trucks to extract him. He mentally notes that if the ambulance windows are completely rolled up and sealed, it will be the definitive signal that his elite syndicate allies, the ones who know the exact mechanics of his precious stand, have arrived to retrieve him. Noticing that a bleeding Josuke is still relentlessly scaling the rocks to pursue him, a desperate poor Tom screams back through the embers, shouting at the hybrid to abandon his kermicidal mission. But Josuke is completely driven by a singular, unbreakable promise, fueled by the desperate need to save his mother, Holly, and entirely unmoved by Rai's brutal sacrifice, he unleashes a specialized multi-layer bubble. Inside the center of the spinning sphere sits what poor Tom perceives to be another lethal yew seed. As the projectile rockets through the air, the internal pressure chambers pop one by one, acting like secondary thrusts that allow the bubble to fly exponentially faster and carve a completely erratic, unpredictable trajectory through the smoke. Completely pursued and haunted by the closing sphere, a terrified poor Tom finds himself utterly cornered at the edge of the estate just as the flashing lights of the fire trucks and the sealed ambulance slam their brakes at the gates. Still heavily poisoned by the yew seeds, poor Tom desperately crawls away from Josuke as the fire trucks and ambulance finally pull into the blazing orchard. The multi-layered bubble continues its erratic, relentless advance towards Tom, who frantically tries to goad Josuke into abandoning his pursuit, but Josuke refuses to relent. Desperate and dizzy from the lethal toxin coursing through his veins, poor Tom almost uses the Lokakaka branch as a makeshift stick to pop the sphere, but hesitates. Instead, he resorts to hurling heavy stones at it as it inexplorably flies closer and closer. Reduced to begging Josuke to spare his life now, Tom sees the bubble tracking directly towards his face. Consumed by pure terror, he ducks and voluntarily cancels Ozone Baby, desperately hoping that removing the intense atmospheric pressure will stop the bubble from exploding. However, to his complete surprise, the bubble glides harmlessly over his head and popped against a nearby branch, revealing that it contained absolutely nothing at all. I do like how a lot of the story so far has been about mental games and mental manipulation. A lot of the stands have been stands that really play on the brain and parts of human nature that all terrify us. Tricked into completely dropping his defense, a stunned Tom looks up to see Josuke stepping out from his own protective bubble, confidently closing the distance between them. Panicking, Tom scrambles to his feet and sprints towards the arriving ambulance, assuming that his syndicate allies are inside. He cries his lungs out, screaming across the yard that he successfully secured the prized branch, but mid-stride, 2 bullets violently tear into the back of his skull, completely obliterating his head. As Josuke immediately crouches down to take cover from the gunfire, the branch slips from Tom's fingers, tumbling onto the dirt behind the ambulance. An unseen figure inside of the vehicle clicks the back door open, snatches the branch, hops back in and drives off at high speed. As poor Tom's remaining flesh crumbles away into silicon dust, Josuke realizes that the enemy organization has zero loyalty. Their only goal from the very beginning was to seize the crop. He launches into a dead sprint to pursue the fleeing vehicle, but the physical toll catches up to him and he collapses to the ground before he can catch them. Just before he fully loses consciousness, he barely manages to catch a fleeting glimpse of the registration plate, Ismori 311. Meanwhile, back at the main house, Nodosuke surprises Tsurugi, who is quietly observing the dying fire while clutching a potted cactus in his hand. Telling his grandson to back away from the dangerous smoke, Nodosuke gently checks on Tsurugi's health. Looking over the property, he correctly deduces that their family was targeted by the rock humans, though thankfully everyone survived without serious injury, and he theorizes that the attacker's primary target was the grafted branch. When Norisuke asks where Jobin went, Tsurugi avoids the question, fearfully asking if his own rock disease will definitely kill him now that the cure has been stolen. Nodosuke comforts him though, answering firmly that he will stand by his side and help him face the disease when the time comes. As Nodosuke then runs off into the smoke to find his son, the reality shifts, revealing that Jobin was actually disguised as the potted cactus the entire time, completely hidden thanks to Paper Moon King's ability. Jobin now stands in the clearing, proudly holding the real Lokakaka branch in his hands. Because of this, he confidently declares total victory for himself and Tsurugi. Meanwhile, speeding away in the ambulance, the unseen driver and their companion inspect their prize, only to realize to their horror that poor Tom was tricked into harvesting an ordinary pear branch. Analyzing the timeline, they deduce that Josuke couldn't possibly have it either, meaning that whoever deliberately started the fire in the orchard must have stolen the true graft. A quick flashback reveals the genius of the plot. One of Paper Moon King's origami creations had suddenly landed on poor Tom as he frantically sought the tree. With our boy also completely distracted by his pursuit of poor Tom, Josuke had also left the real branch behind in the chaos, allowing Jobin to quietly slip in and take it for himself. Carefully now, he grafts the precious Lokakaka branch onto a sturdy ferrocactus to keep it alive. He sternly instructs Tsurugi to keep this a total secret from the rest of the household, stating that he doesn't want his father finding out and ruining everything they've fought for. Jobin looks out over the estate, describing the inherent chaotic madness of the world. He coldly declares that in the end, whoever wins is the one who is automatically in the right. On the other side of the property, Josuke returns to the clearing where Rai fell. To his absolute shock and relief, he watches Rai's unraveled string-like body slowly weave itself back together. But his joy is instantly overpowered by deep despair as he admits the brutal truth: the Lokakaka is gone and they have lost everything. Josuke goes on to detail the specifics of the Lokakaka fruit, tracing its mysterious origins, its radical healing properties, and how the wealthy, like local baseball star Atsunori Iwakiri, utilize it as a miraculous cure. Additionally, Josuke reflects on his own unique origin, explaining that he is a physical fusion of Yoshikage Kira and Josefume Kujo, created by the Lokakaka's power, having completely lost his memories as a result of that fateful equivalent exchange. After the devastating fire in the orchard is finally extinguished, the Higashikata family gathers together to process the destruction. Instantly suspicious, Joshu points a finger at the unfamiliar Rai, accusing him of being the arsonist. However, Nodosuke and Josuke quickly step in to clarify the situation, explaining that Rai is a highly classified plant appraiser working directly for Nodosuke, and the Higashikata estate was targeted because of the Lokaka. Josuke reveals that the branch was ultimately stolen by a fleeing ambulance driver and his companion, whom Nodosuke suspects are both rock humans. Nearby, Saduki and Jobin listen nervously to the conversation. They know the truth, that they actually stole the branch for themselves, and because of that, Jobin tries to subtly mislead Josuke, suggesting he focus his investigation entirely on the hospital. Rai then steps forward to declare that their absolute time limit for finding the Lokaka is now exactly 10 days before it fully regrows. He then explains to an incredulous Joshu how such a feat is biologically possible by grafting the branch onto a sturdy potted cactus. Hato anxiously wonders what the family will do now that their ancestral orchard is burned to the ground, prompting Joshu to comically babble about converting their ruined land into a mushroom hunting tourist attraction. As he rambles on about his ridiculous ideas, a supportive Daya gently notifies him that everyone else has already walked away. Once they are completely alone, Rai turns to Josuke and drops a bombshell. He knows it wasn't poor Tom or the ambulance drivers who set the orchard on fire, but Jobin. Josuke finds this incredibly hard to believe, but Rai assures him that Jobin's defensive behavior and specific positioning gave the deception away. Because of this, Rai plans to secretly investigate Jobin from the inside. Meanwhile, Mitsuba Higashikata parks her car at the university hospital garage and heads towards the elevator, selfishly closing the door just before an elderly lady can enter it. Once inside the doctor's office, she complains to her physician about a sudden deafness in her right ear and severe breathing difficulties. The physician, who is obsessively eating sheets of dried seaweed for his lunch, examines Mitsuba. He pulls her hair back, revealing that the entire right portion of her scalp has completely hardened into solid stone and is actively crumbling away. Despite this horrific symptom, the doctor smoothly claims that she is in perfect health. Mitsuba looks back on her medical history, recalling how she first came to the clinic for a routine breast lift operation, which somehow led to a mysterious teeth disease that she also had treated at this hospital. Her doctor casually interrupts her story to drink a glass of silicone-infused water before massaging her fears. Mitsuba admits that she had been keeping all of these procedures a total secret from her husband Jobin, who hasn't even noticed anything wrong. However, she is terrified about Saduki noticing her condition. Because of that, Mitsuba begs the doctor to fix her and make her look perfectly healthy again, prompting him to make a quick phone call. He turns back to her, claiming that he can grant her a highly classified secret treatment just this once for the staggering price of 200 million yen. He makes it ethically clear to Mitsuba that she is technically healthy already, and that the final decision to pay is entirely up to her. Down in the hospital waiting room, Yasuo reads the breaking news about a massive fire in the Higashikata orchard. Having already been notified of the details by Josuke and Rai, she remains deeply worried about the location of the stolen branch. Suddenly, Yasuo winces in pain from intense menstrual cramps. As she looks up to steady herself, she spots Mitsuba being wheeled across the hallway in a wheelchair. To her complete horror, Mitsuba's ankles are visibly crumbling to the bone, and her feet have completely turned to solid stone. From this point in the series, exactly 10 days, 19 hours, and 6 minutes remain until the final harvest of the Lokaka fruit. Seeing Mitsuba bound to a wheelchair and quickly taken away, Yasuo nervously calls Josuke to report on what she just witnessed. Josuke informs her that their lead on the ambulance license plate has completely hit a dead end. There is absolutely no existing registration for any vehicle anywhere. However, he manages to send her a recording from a surveillance camera near the Higashikata orchard, which provides a crystal clear image of one of the ambulance drivers. Nervously looking around the corridor, Yasuo notices an office in the treatment ward and immediately uses Paisley Park to research its occupants. She makes a shocking discovery. The physician assigned to the office, a man named Dr. Wu Tomoki, is a perfect match for one of the two mysterious ambulance drivers who stole the Lokaka branch. Just as she processes this information, Mitsuba suddenly exits the office, looking completely healthy and walking on her own 2 feet. She calls out saying goodbye to the doctor, though Yasuo immediately notices that the room appears entirely empty. Recognizing Yasuo as one of Joshu's acquaintances, Mitsuba pauses. Looking past her in the vacant office, Yasuo decides to drop the subtlety and directly interrogate Mitsuba about the doctor and the horrific state of her legs just moments prior. However, Mitsuba acts completely ignorant, defensively claiming that absolutely nothing is wrong with her body, not even her scalp. Stepping into the room to investigate, Yasuo inquires about the wheelchair, which has mysteriously vanished from the area. Mitsuba insists she has no memory of any wheelchair, pointing out that she would have no reason to use it since she only came to the clinic for a routine breast enlargement treatment. In an incredibly awkward, aggressive effort to bond over the procedure though, Mitsuba suddenly pulls Yasuo's hand over to her chest while trying to grope the younger girl as well, much to Yasuo's absolute disgust. Brushing off the awkwardness, Mitsuba casually reveals that before marrying into the family, she was actually a promotional model for the Higashikata Fruit Company, which is how she first met Jobin. Yasuo quickly veers the conversation back to the missing doctor, Wu, causing Mitsuba to finally look around and wonder where her physician actually went. Suddenly, Yasuo spots two strange, unrecognized shards resting on a surface. As she moves closer to inspect them, a confused Mitsuba begins to visibly struggle to remember exactly why she came to the hospital in the first place. Taking a quick peek inside of the drawer, Yasuo makes a horrifying discovery. The heavy wheelchair has been violently crushed into pieces and hidden away. Behind her, a completely unfocused Mitsuba begins to obsessively drink the same silicon-laced water and eat the dried seaweed the doctor had been consuming, causing the flesh of her fingers to rapidly swell. The moment Yasuo tries to pull out her phone to call Josuke for help, the two mysterious fragments on the corner violently rub together, emitting a bizarre high-frequency sound that completely stuns both women. Before Yasuo can react, one of the two shards shoots through the air and enters her ear canal, burrowing deep inside her head. Mitsuba's demeanor abruptly changes. Her body stiffens and an entirely different voice begins speaking directly through her mouth, completely controlling her movements. The entity chillingly states that it knows more than anyone else about the boundary between life and death, declaring that Yasuo's discovery is a stroke of terrible fortune. Controlling Mitsuba's limbs, the force violently drags Yasuo deep inside the empty office, snatches her smartphone away, and slams the heavy door firmly shut. At TG University Hospital, Josuke and Rai frantically search for Yasuo, sensing that she is in grave danger because her phone call abruptly cut off. Meanwhile, Yasuo realizes that Wu Tomoko's terrifying ability is extremely similar to what the hair-clipped rock animal did to her in her past when it exploited her weakness to show her a cruel illusion of her father before shattering away into several fragments. Yasuo realizes she cannot move her body at all, but she manages to look back and see Mitsuba pinning her down. Mitsuba is pressing down with an unusually heavy weight, and her hands are completely covered in blisters. Yasuo yells at her to stop, demanding to know if she's an enemy, before Mitsuba finally snaps back to her senses. Extremely confused about the entire situation, Mitsuba looks around, questioning what's going on. Yasuo urgently tells her that she must have eaten a loca cacao fruit, but Mitsuba has absolutely no recollection of what happened aside from paying 200 million yen to treat the allergic reaction on her scalp. Although she defensively claims that her body is now perfect, Yasuo refutes her by laying out the brutal reality of the fruit equivalent exchange process. She begs Mitsuba to quickly look for her cell phone so they can call for help, warning her that they are under direct attack by Wu Tomoki, who is a rock human. Before they can find it, Yasuo is violently attacked by the small fragments that previously entered through her ears. The exact same fragments are also trapped inside Mitsuba's fingers, which explains her sudden blisters and massive increase in physical weight. Mitsuba finally spots Yasuo's cell phone underneath her, but the device has already been shattered to pieces by her crushed body weight. Just then, several fragments emerge from Mitsuba's fingers, multiplying exponentially as they climb up Yasuo's legs, exploiting her vulnerability and attempting to burrow deep inside her. Needing a counter strategy, Yasuo summons Paisley Park. She forces out one of her hands to a nearby hospital computer, allowing her stand to travel through the network directly into the MRI room. At the same time, Paisley Park places its other hand over Yasuo's face to map out exactly where the foreign fragments have invaded her body. The scan reveals the shards are clustering to the right side of her head, actively attempting to fuse with the bone tissue of her skull. Through Paisley Park's analysis, she learns that these fragments are made up of a highly resilient organosilicon compound, forming bonds with oxygen to generate energy. These components form a creature entirely separate from any carbon-based life form. Before the fragments can permanently fuse with her skull, Paisley Park grabs a medical syringe and stabs Yasuo right in the corner of the eye, successfully extracting the dangerous pieces out of it. She then grabs Mitsuba's arm, telling her they need to run away from Dr. Wu immediately. She asserts that the true goal of the rock humans isn't just a simple cash grab, it is the mastery of the loca cacao's equivalent exchange itself. Suddenly, Dr. Wu materializes directly out of the loose fragment pieces on the floor. He calmly states that while Yasuo's deductions are mostly correct, she is also dead wrong about his motivations. Making money is absolutely one of his primary goals, even if it isn't his only one. He mockingly tells Yasuo that she is free to leave if she wishes, but insists that Mitsuba must stay behind because her medical examination is not yet complete. Ignoring him, Yasuo drags a questioning Mitsuba straight out of the room. Refusing to let them escape, Dr. Wu uses a remote control to turn on the air conditioner, using a heavy airflow to scatter his fragmented body across the waiting room. The moment the two women break out into the hallway, they spot Josuke and Rai standing just a short distance ahead of them, though the men's backs are turned to the commotion. With not much time, Mitsuba frantically explains to Yasuo that while she doesn't remember being in a wheelchair or everything that took place in the office, she carries a profound secret she hasn't told anyone in the family, not even her husband or child. She is pregnant, and if her own body is completely cured and healthy, then something far more precious must have been taken away by Wu Tomoki during that horrific equivalent exchange. Fueled by a burning new resolve to discover what happened to her during the treatment, Mitsuba prepares to fight, summoning her own stand to face the oncoming storm. Cutting in though, a sudden rush of memory hits Mitsuba, detailing exactly what happened to her earlier that day. Placed in a wheelchair, she was brought by Dr. Wu Tomoki toward the elevators. When she asked where they were going, Dr. Tomoki flatly told her they were heading to the gynecology department. Though puzzled by the sudden shift in care, Mitsuba didn't argue. Once inside the specialized examination rooms, Dr. Tomoki immediately dismissed the attending nurse, stating he wouldn't need her assistance, and instructed Mitsuba to sit on the table. Growing increasingly suspicious, Mitsuba asked why she was brought to gynecology instead of the orthopedics department, highly doubting that this doctor could seriously practice medicine in both complex fields. To this, Tomoki confidently replied that never once in his life, nor in any aspect of his career, has he ever failed. He explained that his flawless record was born from his raw talent and above all, his obsessive ability to calculate the exact risks of failure. He even disparaged the departing nurse as an example, casually noting that after analysing her personal habits, he concluded her presence would only spell professional trouble. Continuing his philosophy of minimizing all outside risks, Dr. Tomoki performed an ultrasound on Mitsuba and weirdly announced that she was in her 13th week of pregnancy, completely shocking her. Mitsuba was then wheeled deeper into the secure wings of the gynecology department, where she caught a fleeting, bizarre glimpse of a hidden room filled to the brim with the lokakaka trees. But it was there that her memories cut off, right before she snapped out of her daze and bumped into Yasuo. Finally piecing together her history with Tomoki in the present, Mitsuba realizes the terrifying truth. She has absolutely no memory of what kind of surgical treatment she was actually subjected to. Breaking back into reality now, Mitsuba and Yasuo barge straight into the hospital waiting room, still surrounded by the storm of tiny flying fragments. Behind them, Dr. Tomoki's echoing voice explains that his stand grants him the unique ability to reduce his entire body into microscopic shards and cleanly reassemble at will, claiming this is his one and only power. Yasuo spots Josuke and Rai just a short distance away, their backs still turned to the commotion, but before she can scream their names, a nearby male patient suddenly pivots and headbutts her to the floor. Dr. Tomoki had already scattered his fragmented pieces across the entire waiting room, invading the bodies of several unsuspecting patients to trigger violent allergic reactions and controlled muscle spasms, forcing them to attack on his behalf. As the metallic fragments swarm around them, Dr. Tomoki declares how incredibly important Mitsuba is to his organization, both as a massive source of funding and classified information. He goes on to reveal that he is fully aware of Tsurugi's Paper Moon King, which he correctly suspects was directly involved in the recent theft of the branch. To end the chase, he scatters a handful of crushed sleeping pills into the air currents, aiming to knock both women unconscious. Refusing to back down, Mitsuba summons her stand. A glowing arrow instantly manifests in her hand, followed quickly by a second one. The moment she lays the physical arrows across the floor, the surrounding airspace is forcefully cleared of the invading fragments. She quickly summons and places a third arrow floating directly in midair, which creates a sudden pocket of spatial distortion that throws her and Yasuo right into Tomoki's defensive line. Seizing the opening, Mitsuba lands a heavy kick squarely against the doctor, slapping one of her arrows directly onto his chest to violently repel his body up against the ceiling. She quickly explains the mechanics to Yasuo, stating that her stand, Awakening 3 Leaves, allows her to place vectors anywhere in space. These arrows forcefully repel all incoming energy attacking her in a specific direction, and by utilizing several arrows at once, she can redirect that raw energy along the absolute shortest route of the space they surround. Having temporarily immobilized their foe, Mitsuba and Yasuo sprint to a nearby elevator. They hit the buttons to head straight down to the gynecology department. Inside of the elevator cabin, Mitsuba realizes a horrifying detail. Since Tomoki has been manipulating her body the entire day, she must still have several dormant fragments of his stand trapped inside her flesh. Sticking one of her stand arrows directly onto her arm, she forces the vector to activate, violently repelling and ejecting the hidden contents out of her skin. To Yasuo's absolute horror, as the remaining shards hit the elevator floor, she can clearly distinguish microscopic, twitching human arms forming on the ground. And right at that exact moment, the trap springs again. Dr. Tomoki's reassembled face peers down from above, having already crawled his way through the ventilation shafts of the elevator. Yasuo and Mitsuba look down in sheer horror at the elevator floor, staring at what appear to be microscopic, twitching arms of Mitsuba's unborn child, a sight that immediately implies the worst. Completely unfazed by their distress, Dr. Wu calmly expounds on his worldview. He glosses over his own twisted nature, explaining that his position as a medical doctor who technically heals people automatically puts him on a permanent moral high ground. He asserts that the Lokakaka is a revolutionary public good, one that must be aggressively kept a secret from the general populace to maintain its value. To push them over the edge, he coldly reminds the grieving mother that aborting a fetus at the 14th week of pregnancy is still entirely legal under the law. Consumed by absolute wrath, Mitsuba and Yasuo instantly summoning Awakening 3 Leaves and Paisley Park to launch a coordinated counterattack, but Dr. Wu seamlessly scatters his physical form to evade the strike. He quickly reassembles a singular arm mid-air, lunging forward to physically pin Mitsuba's hands and block her from placing any more vector arrows. But he's a second too late. Mitsuba has already slapped her stand arrows directly onto the elevator wall, layering them to triple the localized downward acceleration. The sudden, violent surge of kinetic force slams Dr. Wu's fragmented body straight into the floor. Seizing the opening, the two women grab a roll of heavy medical tape from a nearby cart, rapidly taping the crushed pieces of the rock human firmly to the floorboards. Mitsuba kneels down, carefully gathering the tiny scattered fragments of her unborn child into her trembling hands, utterly distraught by the terrifying realization that her baby might already be dead. However, Yasuo leans in closer, noticing that the cellular fragments still look strangely active and alive. Before they step out of the elevator cabin, Mitsuba makes sure to ground Dr. Wu's tape body form into fine dust, rolls his loose particles into a compact ball, and the moment they reach the gynecology department, hurls him forcefully out an open window into the wind. Hurrying down the main corridor now towards the secure examination rooms, Mitsuba hesitates for a brief agonizing second, terrified of what the fruit might take from her next. Ultimately, her maternal instinct wins out, and she resolves to save her child at any costs. By using the vectors of Awakening 3 Leaves, she gently presses the living fragments of her fetus back into her own womb. While Mitsuba stabilizes her condition, Yasuo turns a corner and accidentally bumps into Toru, a young man from her past. Recognizing her old acquaintance, she urgently begs him to find Josuke down in the main lobby and directs him up to their 3rd floor. Toru casually accepts the favor, but not before playfully teasing her about their history together. Having skirted away from Mr. Steal Your Girl and you guys are not ready for the thievery to come, once inside their main examination room, Yasuo deploys Paisley Park to scan the room, quickly uncovering a highly secure hidden door seamlessly blended into the back wall. As Paisley Park hacks into the facility's localized network, the override accidentally triggers a pre-recorded video file stored on the database. On screen, Dr. Wu Tomoki appears, explaining in exhaustive detail everything his research team has uncovered regarding the Lokakaka. In the recording, Wu breaks down the exact chemical dosage and the rough biological mechanisms of the fruit. For yet unknown reasons, the fruit actively chooses whichever specific body part it pleases to turn into stone during the exchange. He notes that his personal ability to scatter his physical form into microscopic particles was the only reason he could safely operate on wealthy clients, as he could purposefully manipulate his cellular structure to avoid having his own vital organs calcified. Pretty much, bro would break down and make sure that the fruit didn't infect the brain. Watching the presentation, Yasuo ponders who this classified briefing was actually created for, and which faction currently holds the real stolen branch. Breaking through the final firewall, Paisley Park successfully cracks the vault's electromagnetic code, and the two women step across the threshold into a massive, hidden greenhouse filled to the brim with mature Lokakaka trees. Down in the crowded hospital lobby, Toru successfully spots Josuke and Raimo Mizuku navigating the crowd. He approaches the duo and lets them know that Yasuo wanted them to head up to level 3. When Josuke and a suspicious Rai sharply demand to know what his connection to Yasuo actually is, Toru offers a casual, confident smile, revealing that he is indeed her ex-boyfriend. I think, out of every single character, now that I'm pretty sure I've seen every single character in JoJolion at this point, or all of the ones introduced, Toru is definitely my favorite, just looks-wise. Bro is a demon, man. His style is so cool. I love it. It's just so unique. Anyway, enough of me gooning over Toru. We're about to steal me away from my wife, so moving on. Having discovered a secret laboratory where dozens of loca cacao trees are carefully stored, Yasuo and Mitsuba stand in absolute awe at the sight of so many of the precious coveted fruits. Scanning the high-tech laboratory, Yasuo notes that the walls are lined with specialized niches containing cages for small animals alongside rows of test tubes, but she immediately notices one major detail. The newly grafted branch is nowhere to be found. Eager to save her unborn child first though, Mitsuba wastes no time, immediately plucking and eating one of the fruits while completely assuming whatever terrifying risks the equivalent exchange might demand. However, Yasuo's eyes widen as she notices that the fruit and the tree itself are laced with microscopic tiny rock fragments, making her highly suspicious. Before she can voice her doubts, Mitsuba abruptly turns on her, slapping down one of Awakening 3 Leaves' vector arrows and sending Yasuo crashing violently into a nearby wall. Not stopping, Mitsuba relentlessly continues the assault, using her vectors to propel Yasuo through the glass window of a laboratory niche, scattering shards, test tubes, and petri dishes all across the floor. Spotting a stream of familiar metallic fragments pouring out of the automated crop sprinklers, Yasuo instantly realizes the truth. Wu Tomoki has already reassembled himself inside of the room and successfully possessed Mitsuba, taking complete control of her mind and movements. Unable to fight back against Wu's overwhelming influence, Mitsuba's body moves like a puppet, violently launching the sharp petri dishes and chemical test tubes directly at Yasuo. Yasuo barely jumps out of the way in time, taking temporary refuge inside of the shattered wall compartment. Dr. Wu partially manifests his face from the swirling debris, taunting Yasuo by coldly explaining that she is already doomed. The tubes and dishes that she just smashed into contained live, deadly virus samples, leaving her exposed to a horrific infection. He casually adds that this entire hidden laboratory was originally set up by Holly herself, who had built the vault to research how the loca cacao interacted with various diseases. Finishing his smug explanation, Wu forces Mitsuba to summon another cluster of arrows, aiming to crush Yasuo once and for all. Thinking fast, Yasuo grabs a roll of industrial medical tape left in the compartment, using it to physically block the incoming vector arrows before lunging forward to slap the adhesive directly onto Mitsuba's face. The localized kinetic energy of the slap forcefully purges the majority of Wu's invading fragments right out of Mitsuba's skin, though the force of the blast sends Mitsuba flying backwards into the flock of trees. Narrowly evading the appalling viral strains on the floor, Yasuo rushes over to help her ally to her feet. Refusing to lose here, a desperate Dr. Wu decides to pulverize the entire indoor garden into fine, rocky fragments, scattering the sharp particles directly at the women's faces while threatening to force them so much fruit that their entire bodies will petrify into solid stone. But just as the shards are about to strike, Josuke bursts into the laboratory. Summoning Soft and Wet, he rapidly deploys a dense cluster of bubbles to trap all of the flying fragments mid-air. Having strategically mixed his bubbles with quick-drying medical cement, Josuke traps Dr. Wu permanently inside the hardening compound, leaving the rock human to helplessly drown within the thick liquid. As a deep cloud of the airborne virus begins to rapidly spread from the far end of the room, Yasuo frantically presses the group to evacuate, warning everyone that the stolen loca cacao branch isn't in this vault. Rai quickly scans the surrounding foliage and confirms its absence, realizing that these trees are only the standard old variety. Acting fast, the appraiser unleashes doggy style, using his unraveled limbs to systematically slash the remaining trees into useless pieces before the group dives out of the laboratory. Slamming the heavy door firmly shut behind them to seal the virus in, Rai turns to Yasuo, asking how she can be so absolutely certain that the new branch hasn't fallen into the hands of the other rock humans. Yasuo explains that Dr. Wu's desperate actions proved it. He explicitly wanted to use Mitsuba to help him research the branch because someone had secretly switched it before he could secure it. Looking over at a dazed Mitsuba, Yasuo notes that Dr. Wu clearly had one prime suspect in mind, Jobin Higashikata. For her part, Mitsuba shyly covers her face, revealing that her nose has completely petrified and crumbled away, the price of the equivalent exchange for the fruit she ate. In the immediate aftermath of their chaotic battle against Wu Tomoki, Josuke, Yasuo, and Rai assemble to process what they have uncovered. Digging deep into the history and profile of TG University Hospital, they map out the network of the enemy syndicate, discovering that Wu Tomoki, urban gorilla, whose real name is revealed to be Ryo, something I cannot pronounce and I'm not going to try to right now, Poor Tom, and the hospital's unseen head doctor are the only individuals on the record to have ever accessed the secret laboratory. Finding a total lack of personal information on this mysterious head doctor, Rai and Josuke logically conclude that he must be the mastermind currently holding the new fruit branch. However, Yasuo stands firm with her assertion, assuring them that the Loca Cacao Research Organization does not have the branch. She explains that Dr. Wu's desperate assault on Mitsuba proved he was completely in the dark and was trying to force its location out of her. Upset by her refutation, Rai sharply criticizes her brash, reckless actions back in the hospital, arguing that both he and Josuke saw the ambulance drivers physically take the branch with their own eyes. Josuke sides with the appraiser on this one, adding that the entire Higashikata family was completely locked away from the orchard under Ozone Baby's pressure during the attack, making it mechanically impossible for any of them to have intervened. I do kind of like this here. Josuke has no reason to actually believe Yasuo, and logically it makes sense this way. They do know about Paper Moon King, but they don't know that he even played a part throughout the previous event with the branch. Anyways, and even with this said, the guys push Job into the back of their mind and decide to prioritize investigating the head doctor first. Frustrated that her theory has fallen entirely on deaf ears, Yasuo walks away, only to incidentally cross paths with Toru once again. In a brief, emotionally charged moment, she instinctively holds hands with her ex-boyfriend before quickly pulling away as reality sets in. Observing the interaction from afar, Rai playfully teases Josuke about his relationship with Yasuo, but his demeanor quickly shifts back to business as he proposes they look into Toru's background as well. Smart man there. So here we actually, I guess we have like a massive jump forward. We had like 10 days or whatever before the fruit was to be harvested. Well, now we are jumping to a tense 13 minutes just before the fateful harvest of the Lokakaka branch. Back at the Higashikata estate, Jojo plays a mean-spirited prank on Hato, using Nut King Cole to detach his own tongue and hurl it directly at his sister, playing entirely dumb when she furiously accuses him of doing it. However, when Dai sends Tsurugi across the room to look for Nodosuke, the boy accidentally steps directly onto Joshu's tongue, causing the trickster to double over in agonizing pain and immediately getting karma for what, he was doing before. On his way up to Nodosuke's private office, Tsurugi reflects on how stand abilities remain a strictly guarded, private topic even among a tight-knit family like his. He then ominously thinks to himself that there always comes a time when the hidden, darkest feelings of the human heart will inevitably burst to the surface, completely impossible to stop. Tsurugi then steps across the threshold of the office, where a horrifying sight greets him. Nodosuke's seemingly dead, severely bleeding body lays slumped on the floor inside of a heavy body bag, one of his arms completely severed from his torso. Showing a chilling, unsettling calm, Tsurugi grabs the bag and begins to quietly drag Nodosuke's corpse out onto the balcony, completely oblivious as a small origami frog hops silently out of the plastic wrapping. The timeline here then does some little skibbity and we go back to 7 days, 1 hour and 2 minutes before the harvest. In town, Mitsuba arrives outside Tsurugi's school to pick him up following a class field trip to the Oshiroyama Yamadere Trail. The gathered crowd of parents and teachers is obviously disturbed by the sight of Mitsuba's missing nose, but she brushes off the stares, reassuring them that everything is perfectly fine before calling her grandson. However, the trip leader firstly pulls Mitsuba aside to report a troubling incident that occurred during the excursion. According to the teacher, Tsurugi was relentlessly teased by a group of girls who brought up rumors regarding a murder that Jobin had allegedly committed. Almost immediately after the bullying took place, the apparent leader of the girls, Mina, was startled by a live frog leaping directly onto her shoe, causing her to panic and slip backwards into a muddy puddle. Defending her family and firmly believing that Tsurugi has done absolutely nothing wrong, an aggressive Mitsuba threatens to use her influence to have the teacher fired on the spot. As she turns around to pull Tsurugi away, she spots the boy hiding silently behind the school playground slides. Suddenly, one of the girls who had bullied Tsurugi sprints up to the teacher, crying hysterically and screaming for someone to call an ambulance. Terrified shouts and panicking screams erupt from the school's front entrance as the body of Mina is discovered. The young girl has been horrifically crushed between the heavy iron gates of the school, and a nearby bystander notices that her underwear is deeply stained with blood. Mina's mother obviously breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably as she cradles her daughter's body, fiercely insisting that the massive iron gates were far too heavy to have closed on their own. Someone must have intentionally forced them shut. As the panicked teachers ask if anyone saw what happened, the terrified girl who had raised the alarm points a trembling finger into the schoolyard, claiming she saw Tsurugi physically push the iron gates closed. In an instant, the entire crowd turns their gaze towards the silent boy, leaving Mitsuba standing in absolute frozen shock. Exactly 6 days, 4 hours and 12 minutes before the harvest, Josuke, Rai and Yasuo launch their search for the mysterious head doctor, the supposed final member of the Lokakaka research organization. Although she tags along with the group for now, Yasuo remains completely certain that the coveted branch is actually hidden somewhere back at the Higashikata house. Stepping up to the information desk though, Rai bluntly requests a direct meeting with the head doctor, Satoru Akefu. The receptionist naturally refuses to let a total stranger interfere with the doctor's strict schedule. Refusing to back down though, Rai pushes further, demanding to know why there are absolutely no pictures of the head doctor anywhere on the hospital's official website. His intense prying is suddenly cut short when the receptionist points towards the hallway, where Dr. Akafu is supposedly walking away in the distance. The group quickly tries to snap a picture of him, but they fail to get a clear shot and immediately decide to trail him through the facility. Despite supposedly being an 89-year-old man who relies on a walking cane, Akafu vanishes from sight with impossible speed, completely blending into the hospital crowd. Yasuo correctly guesses that the dude must have slipped into a staff-only staircase, but the moment they burst through the door, they are shocked to see the elderly doctor already nearing the very bottom of the flight of stairs. Suddenly, a bizarre, unknown stand manifests on the ceiling above them. Josuke instantly summons Soft and Wet to launch an attack, but the spectral figure vanishes into thin air before the bubbles can strike. Resuming their pursuit, the group's momentum is violently interrupted when a stray hospital bed suddenly rolls into their path, causing a massive collision. Distracted by the impact, they look up to find the corridor completely empty. Before they can regroup, Toru abruptly appears and sidetracks Yasuo, begging her for help to save a nearby choking child before immediately pivoting to flirt with her. Annoyed by the constant disruptions from this man, Josuke aggressively accuses Toru of purposely interfering with their investigations. Unfazed by the hostility, Toru calmly points over his shoulder, noting that the head doctor is actually sitting right behind them on a nearby bench, utterly shocking the trio. Meanwhile, Mitsuba tries to comfort her son Tsurugi, gently asking if he has been keeping any secrets from her. Tsurugi quietly turns the question back on her, asking if she isn't hiding secrets of her own, which makes her incredibly nervous. Flashing away from there and cutting to 6 days, 3 hours and 25 minutes before the harvest, where apparently Mitsuba attends an emergency parents association meeting regarding the schoolyard accident. The director displays a security recording showing Tsurugi standing right next to the iron gates just before they mysteriously moved and crushed his classmate. Infuriated, Mitsuba snaps back, declaring that there is absolutely no direct proof of Tsurugi's physical involvement and insults the entire room before storming out. As a final act of pure spite, she deploys Unawakening 3 leaves, placing vector arrows that force the entire committee to violently splash their own burning hot beverages directly into their faces. But as she stepped out of the building, she began piecing together the timeline of that fateful day. Rushing back home, Mitsuba finds the main house completely empty. Heading over to the extra house that she shares with Jobin, she is suddenly startled by her husband, who playfully grabs her from behind and immediately asks how much she's been spending on plastic surgery lately. For a terrifying moment, Mitsuba panics, worrying that he has somehow discovered the staggering 200 million yen she spent at the hospital. However, Jobin quickly gets sidetracked, expressing his genuine awe and admiration for a newly shaped nose. Scooping her up, he carries her off towards the bedroom to fool around while the rest of the family is away. During the embrace, Mitsuba is suddenly reminded of Tsurugi, who she knows has been hiding a heavy secret from her. She mentions that just the day before, Tsurugi was accused of intentionally getting a classmate crushed inside a heavy iron school gate. She admits to Jobin that their son in fact did have a direct motive. The classmate in question had been mercilessly teasing Tsurugi about his grandmother, Kaito, and her infamous murder conviction. Turning completely serious, Jobin drops the romance and indulges in another intense motivational rant. He explains to his wife that although humanity has constructed lofty concepts like luck, good, and evil, he ultimately believes them to be complete lies manufactured by society. To him, the world boils down to one simple truth: absolute strength. The strong survive and the weak perish. Returning to the topic of their son, Jobin claims that Tsurugi fully understands this philosophy and knows what it takes to become strong. He declares that the Higashikata family will inevitably prevail against all opposition because they are the ones willing to acquire that raw power, and in his eyes, Tsurugi has no time to concern himself with the petty words of a teasing classmate. With that, Jobin takes his leave and heads to his private beetle room. Left alone and deeply puzzled, Mitsuba looks out the window, only to freeze in shock. The hospital's head doctor, Satoru, is standing completely still near the far edge of the estate grounds. Panicking, she frantically tries to force the window open, but her nail violently snaps against the frame. Distracted by the sharp sting of the injury, she looks back outside a second later, only to find that the mysterious doctor has completely vanished from sight. Reminiscing about the information Josuke, Yasuo, and Rai had uncovered, Mitsuba grows deeply confused as to why the head doctor of the university hospital would be lurking near their private estate. Walking over to ask Jobin for a band-aid, she catches a fleeting, revealing glimpse of a newly grafted Lokakaka tree hidden perfectly among his potted cacti. Although Jobin acts entirely unconcerned when she walks in, a quiet seed of doubt about his wife's prying eyes begins to grow in his mind. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Josuke and Rai are moving in to directly confront Dr. Akafu, but out of nowhere, they forcefully smash face first into a closed glass door, and the moment Rai tries to recover, he trips over a cluster of scattered chairs. Reviewing the sheer absurdity of these consecutive incidents, Rai logically concludes that the head doctor is undoubtedly the mastermind of the entire Lokakaka organization and an incredibly dangerous stand user on top of it. Realizing that they are dealing with a threat here, the trio splits up in order to try and surround the elderly doctor, which, gives Josuke and Yasuo a brief moment to discuss Toru. While Yasuo firmly reassures Josuke that she no longer harbors any romantic feelings for her ex-boyfriend, Josuke remains internally plagued by uncertainty. Eventually, the duo meet back up, but they find that the head doctor has inexplicably and flawlessly slipped past Rai's guard. Turning on their heels to catch up with the target as he exits the hospital entrance, Rai violently trips yet again, this time crashing over a heavy metal umbrella stand. Thinking fast, Yasuo deploys Paisley Park to hack into the main entrance security cameras, but the feed is continuously distorted and always slightly off, meaning she can never get a clear look at Akafu's face. Handing her smartphone over to Josuke so he can watch the live tracking, Yasuo buries herself in investigating all of the exterior camera angles, completely ignoring an incoming call from Toru. However, Josuke cannot resist the intense temptation to listen to the voicemail Toru left behind. Opening the file, Josuke listens as Toru claims that when their hands briefly touched before in the corridor, Yasuo's reaction distinctly showed lingering traces of love. Declaring his undying affection for her, Toru vows to do whatever it takes to return their relationship back to the passionate love they shared when they first started dating. He expresses deep regret for breaking up with her a year ago and begs her to meet him at a specific location while attaching a photo to the message. Looking at the screen, Josuke stares directly at a romantic selfie of Yasuo and Toru smiling together near the coast. But the romantic drama is instantly shattered as Rai suddenly recalls every single time they've bumped into ordinary objects during the chase. Piecing the terrifying pattern together, he realizes they have already been caught in the jaws of an active stand. Before he can even warn the others, the brutal reality of the curse manifests. Rai looks down to find that his legs have been horrifically shredded, proving that the enemy's ability forces everyday objects to continuously and lethally collide with its targeted victims. Collapsing from his injuries, Rai pieces the pattern together, deducing that they were placed under an active stand attack the exact moment they made the conscious decision to pursue the head doctor. He warns the group that Akafu isn't running away out of fear, but is purposefully letting himself be followed to lure them into a deadly trap. Ignoring Rai's warnings to back off, Yasuo spots the head doctor boarding a city bus just outside of the facility, prompting her and Josuke to sprint after the vehicle to snap a clear photo for identification. They track the bus as it slows down near the hospital entrance, and Yasuo prepares to use her phone camera. However, the curse strikes again. As the heavy tires roll over a discarded cigarette butt, the small piece of trash is launched through the air with the force of a bullet, piercing cleanly through Josuke's hand. Wincing in immediate agony, Josuke shouts a warning to Yasuo, but she pushes forward just as Akafu turns his head to look through the bus's rear window. Just as she gets her opportunity, a speeding car swerves out of nowhere, threatening to crush her. Thinking fast, Josuke deploys soft and wet bubbles to cushion the impact against the vehicle, narrowly shielding them from taking fatal damage. Realizing that they cannot push their luck any further against this logic-defying ability, the trio halts their pursuit. Unfortunately, a nearby patient walking on the hospital grounds has been splattered with Josuke's flying blood from the earlier injury. Enraged, the pedestrian stomps over to initiate a fight and throws a wild punch which Josuke easily deflects using his bubbles. In an instant, the curse redirects the kinetic energy back onto the patient and his neck suddenly snaps with a loud crack, causing him to collapse backwards onto stone, dead on the pavement. The horrific incident instantly draws the panicked attention of everyone outside of the hospital. Rai sharply warns Josuke not to touch the corpse, noting that the lethal force was somehow repelled from Josuke directly onto the attacker. However, a massive legal problem has arisen from this. To any outside observer, it looked just like Josuke had committed murder. Faced with imminent arrest, the tension is broken when Toru steps out from the crowd, reassuring the panicking Yasuo that he will act as an eyewitness to testify to Josuke's innocence. Of course he will, I just know for a fact bro's gonna switch up on him as soon as he gets. I just know for a fact it's gonna happen. He works at the hospital, so he has to be a bad guy. The narrative then jumps forward to 5 days, 1 hour, and 5 minutes before the harvest. High on the rooftop of a luxury condominium, a returned Ojido Sasame relaxes inside a rooftop jacuzzi, inviting his wealthy companion, Meiko Katani, to come join him. I love how her name is Mako, like implying that she's some sort of like shark or something like that, you know, along those lines. Mako shark, and it's not spelled like it at all, but I imagine it sounds like that in Japanese. Could be wrong right here, and I've just pronounced the name completely wrong like normal, but either way, Mako flatly declines, noting she only stopped by to pick up some documents. While she does that, she also pours herself a glass of champagne and launches into an angry rant about Mitsuba Higashikata, seething over the hot drink incident from the school board meeting. Shifting her focus to the Higashikata estate, Mako comments on how the orchard grounds are worth an absolute fortune. She dreams of seizing the property one day to build a lucrative casino complex, complaining that despite her best efforts to seduce Norisuke Higashikata IV, Mitsuba has continuously acted as a major thorn in her side. Even so, Mako notes that the dark rumors surrounding the family are highly intriguing, specifically how Kaito Higashikata allegedly murdered a child years ago to cure her own son, Jobin, of a mysterious stone affliction. When Ojiro brings up her vast corporate holdings, Mako dismisses his praise, explaining that the true hidden value lies entirely on the Higashikata terrain itself, which is rumored to possess miraculous healing properties. Hurrying out to pick up her daughter from school, Mako accidentally steps squarely on Ojiro's hand, forcing him to pull it back and reveal that his fingers have been violently bitten off. Obviously, you know, we found that out way back during the earlier chapters. Anyways, and although he casually brushes off the injury to keep her calm, Ojiro's mind races the moment she leaves. He privately recalls the legendary healing properties of a mysterious fruit, vividly reminiscing about the dangerous research Kira had been conducting right before his sudden disappearance and death. Moving now into the commercial district of Morio, Ojiro smashes back an ice cream sundae from the Higashikata fruit parlor alongside a bunch of other convenience store snacks. In truth, his eating binge is merely a cover. He's intensely staking out the parlor itself. When an elderly lady nearby sharply complains about him littering and trashing the public space, Ojiro lazily stuffs his wrappers into a plastic bag, then maliciously uses his chewing gum to stick the trash bag onto a random passerby's luggage. Keeping his eyes locked onto the Higashikata family's flagship store, Ojiro calculates his next move. Meanwhile, a short distance away, Tsurugi dozes off on a bench near a public fountain, dreaming obsessively about the new Lokakaka fruit. Sitting right near him are a mother and a young baby. The infant reaches out, almost touching one of Tsurugi's delicate origami creations, prompting the mother to quickly pull her child away. Tsurugi then suddenly jolts awake. Taking in his surroundings, he gasps in pure panic and bolts from the scene. A second later, the mother turns around in horror to realize that her baby has mysteriously crawled into the fountain and is actively drowning. Fleeing the scene as the first physical symptoms of the hereditary rock disease begin to flare up across his skin, Tsurugi impatiently awaits the final harvest of the new fruit. He remains fiercely determined to keep completely silent about his worsening condition, terrified that if Norisuke finds out, his grandfather will sacrifice himself to perform a traditional equivalent exchange. Spotting a group of older teenagers walking past him, laughing and smiling, Tsurugi solemnly wonders if he will ever be as happy as them when he reaches their age, and asks himself what brutal costs must be paid to guarantee that happiness. Eventually, he walks up to a secluded cliffside path, only to be suddenly cornered by Ojiro Sasame. Ojiro aggressively exposes the research he has conducted on Tamaki Damo's dry cleaning business, boasting that he knows every detail regarding the Lokakaka syndicate's massive money laundering scheme, insisting on the severe life-shattering punishments the family would suffer if their crimes were ever brought to light. Ojiro systematically backs a distressed Tsurugi right up to the sheer edge of the cliff, bringing up the fact that his friend Yoshikage Kira died in these exact coastal waters, and mentioning the existence of the Lokakaka itself. Ojiro states he has full proof of Jobin's smuggling operations. Overwhelmed with the stress, Tsurugi looks as though he is about to lose his footing and plunge off the cliff, but in a bizarre twist of perspective, it is Ojiro who suddenly loses his balance and goes flying over the edge. Barely catching a hold of the tree pine branch, Ojiro looks up in shock, realizing his senses have been violently distorted by Tsurugi's stand, and that he is dealing with a dangerous stand user. Sprinting all of the way back to the safety of the Higashikata estate, a panicked Tsurugi immediately tells his father everything about Ojiro's blackmail attempt. Deeply alarmed by the arrival of an unpredictable wildcard here, Jobin frantically checks the perimeters to ensure no one has breached the house, before rushing down to check on his hidden Lokakaka tree, with Tsurugi following close in behind. At first glance, the hidden greenhouse vault appears perfectly secure. However, Jobin and Tsurugi quickly realize something is terribly wrong. Tsurugi's hand bears a strange, raw friction mark, and he realizes he has been blindly holding a smartphone that doesn't belong to him. In reality, Ojiro has successfully used his stand to hijack Tsurugi's hand on the cliffside, using the device's camera to look through the boy's eyes and pinpoint the exact coordinates of the hidden plant. Phoning Meiko Katani, a smug Ojido tells her that he has finally gathered more than enough criminal evidence to permanently ruin the Higashikata family's prestigious reputation, before instantly sending her the digital location coordinates to the fruit. Utilizing his stand, fun, Ojido takes absolute control over Tsurugi's left hand, and no matter how hard the boy tries, he cannot scratch the enemy's marks off his skin. Under Ojido's remote control, Tsurugi's possessed hand forcefully slides open the room's window, brutally smashes his own face, and then yanks his own body forward so violently that he is thrown directly into the window frame, shattering the glass panels. Acting quickly to prevent further life-threatening injuries, Jobin lunges forward and tightly holds onto Tsurugi's flailing left arm, which is now sticking out of the open window. However, this positioning places them right where the enemy wants. From his vantage point on the rooftop above, Ojido successfully lands two of his control markers directly on Jobin's hands, forcing Jobin's hijacked limbs to wrap around his own son's neck and begin choking him. Ojido delivers a cold ultimatum: surrender the new Lokaka plant immediately, or watch himself be forced to murder his own son. He boasts that he has already sent a digital recording of the hidden plant to an outside contact, which will serve as ironclad evidence of Jobin's smuggling and money laundering operations. Out of options here, and desperate to save his son, Jobin finally relents, revealing that their miraculous fruit will be ready for full harvest in exactly 3 days. Pleasantly surprised by this revelation, Ojido demands that both father and son manifest their stands so he can judge their own raw power. In response, Jobin and Tsurugi summon Speed King and Paper Moon King. Ojido dismissively slaps Tsurugi's origami aside, noting that he has no interest in a child's toy. Deeming Speed King's fiery presence to be far too dangerous to leave alive, Ojido decides to eliminate the threat entirely. He forces Jobin's hands to violently slam the heavy window frame shut onto himself and Tsurugi, driving massive jagged shards of broken glass deep into their heads and necks. As Jobin and Tsurugi collapse onto the floor, bleeding profusely beneath the window, Ojido smugly enters the room to claim his prizes. He picks up the smartphone and coveted plant pot, taunting the dying father by stating that the plant was originally meant for Holly Joestar Kira, and the Higashikata family was never supposed to possess it. As a self-proclaimed friend of the late Yoshikage Kira, Ojido considers the fruit to be his rightful posthumous inheritance. To add even more insult to injury, he casually plucks a few cash bills from Jobin's wallet before exiting the estate. From here, Ojido quickly catches a taxi and heads towards Meiko Katani's high-rise apartment, continuously complaining to the driver about the oppressive summer heat. However, the moment he steps out of the vehicle, he notices something is terribly wrong. Within seconds, his fingers, head and tongue break out in horrific, boiling blisters, and the sheer localized pressure causes one of his eyes to violently burst. Dropping the precious flower pot in a panic, a screaming Ojido runs blindly into the building's rooftop recreation area. Back at the Higashikata household, the brutal scene is revealed to be an absolute illusion, which, kind of makes sense. Dude touched Tsurugi's frickin' Paper Moon King. Both Jobin and Tsurugi are completely safe and uninjured. Tsurugi's Paper Moon King had flawlessly deceived Ojido's perception from the very beginning, altering his reality to make the glass shards appear exponentially larger and deadlier than they actually were, allowing the duo to perfectly fake their gruesome deaths. Reassuring his son, Jobin notes that based on the devastating thermal trap he left on Ojido, the stolen flower pot should be nearby and extremely easy to recover. Even so, Jobin remains deeply unsettled, wondering how the deep information leak regarding the Lokaka truly runs through Morio. A short while later, Meiko Katani and her young daughter return to their luxury apartment. Hearing a smartphone buzzing continuously from the balcony, they decide that Ojido must have already arrived, though he is nowhere to be seen in the living room. Meiko internally praises her accomplice for securing the leverage needed to finally ruin the Higashikata family. Her daughter, though, spots the ringing phone resting on a table right beside the balcony jacuzzi, and Meiko picks it up to answer. On the other line, Jobin immediately identifies the voice as a woman, concluding that she must be Ojido's secret contact. Growing uneasy, Meiko frantically calls out for Ojido to join her, but Jobin calmly cuts her off to explain the true, terrifying mechanics of his Speed King. His stand has the ability to store immense amounts of heat inside any physical object or precise point on a target's body, which is violently released the exact moment that point is touched. Realizing though from the sheer confusion in her voice that Meiko is not a stand user and has no idea what in the world he's even talking about, Jobin feels a sense of grim reassurance. Since she poses no supernatural threat to him, he can simply eliminate her to protect his secret while choosing to spare her innocent family. Before Meiko can even scream, Speed King's latent heat signature detonates across her face. Boiling blisters erupt instantly, her eye bursts from the thermal pressure and she collapses over the edge of the jacuzzi. Sinking rapidly to the bottom of the bubbling water, Meiko drowns, her body settling right alongside Ojido's hidden corpse. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the horror unfolding just feet away, Mako's daughter remains entirely distracted by her own phone. Hanging up the call, Jobin calmly walks over, retrieves the intact Lokakakar plant, and begins his quiet walk back to the estate. The countdown to the final harvest of the legendary fruit now stands at a precise 3 days, 1 hour, and 19 minutes. Morio's police force scrambles into action, launching a massive manhunt for Josuke Higashikata and Rai Momozuku, who are now the prime suspects in the bizarre death of the patients outside TG University Hospital. Back at the estate, the Higashikata family is trying to enjoy a peaceful day, but Nodosuke's quiet afternoon is completely shattered when he opens the newspaper and reads that Josuke and Rai are wanted for murder. Simultaneously, a breaking news report flashes across the living room television, broadcasting the discovery of Ojido Sasame and Mako Katani's bodies. Meanwhile, a wounded Rai sits quietly alongside Josuke in a car that they have meticulously hidden up in the dense branches of a large tree. Having managed to purchase basic medical supplies from a nearby convenience store, Rai focuses on stitching up his severely shredded legs. At the same time, the two analyze the terrifying logic behind Satoru Akafu's stand, theorizing that the ability automatically forces everyday physical objects to violently collide with anyone who dares to pursue the head doctor. Their intense strategic discussion is briefly interrupted when Rai looks down through the leaves and spots a municipal worker arriving to prune the very tree they are hiding in. Leaning out, Rai politely asks the worker to postpone his clipping for the day, even thanking the man with a basket of fresh peaches to keep him cooperative. Rai then pulls a promotional flyer announcing a high-profile medical lecture on a regenerative medicine scheduled to take place the following day at TG University Hospital, with Dr. Akafu listed as the keynote speaker. Driven by a desperate need to finally see the mastermind's face, Rai asks Josuke if he is willing to infiltrate the event. Josuke readily agrees, though his attention is briefly hijacked when he notices the article detailing Ojido's sudden death. At Josuke's prompting, Rai then calculates the biological timeline, noting that the new Lokakakar fruit will reach peak maturity and be ready for harvest in exactly 48 hours. The moment they both make the concrete internal decision to attend the hospital lecture, the mysterious long-nosed stand from the stairwell instantly reappears on the car's roof. Josuke immediately summons Soft and Wet to strike, but the phantom entity vanishes back into thin air before he can connect with it. Hastily jumping down from the tree to avoid a localized disaster, the duo tries to process the mechanics of the curse and eventually reach a horrifying conclusion. The deadly stand attack is triggered by the mere mental intent of pursuing Satoru Akafu. Before they can formulate a counter-strategy, a passing police cruiser spots the two fugitives and gives chase. As they run, a sudden downpour begins to fall over Morio. To Rai and Josuke's absolute horror, the falling raindrops begin to slice straight through their skin and clothes like high-velocity bullets. Narrowly avoiding a fatal blow to the face, Josuke frantically tries to deploy a shield of soft and wet bubbles to deflect the downpour, but the supernatural force of the curse causes the bubbles to instantly pop upon contact. Left with no other choice now, the two are forced to ironically dive straight into the back of one of the pursuing police cars for physical shelter. Realizing that the enemy's logic-defying ability makes defensive fighting impossible against him, Josuke and Rai recognize that they must locate Satoru Akafu and eliminate him immediately. Furthermore, a dark realization washes over Josuke as he begins to fear for Yasuo's safety, knowing that if she is tracking the head doctor online, she too is technically pursuing him and is in imminent mortal danger. Their sudden intrusion shocks and infuriates the two police officers sitting inside. The policemen aggressively order them out of the vehicle, just as multiple backup cruisers arrive on the scene, completely surrounding the area. Recognizing that their predicament is nearly hopeless, Josuke turns to Rai and delivers a solemn confession, stating that his identity as Josuke has only ever been temporary. He explains that he feels like a ghost with no true past. Despite half of his physical being originating from Josefume Kujo, he possesses none of Josefume's memories, and no one from his previous life is looking out for him. Because of this complete void, he declares that he must secure the new Lokakakar fruit and achieve a perfect equivalent exchange to save Holy Jo Starkera. To him, curing her is the only absolute proof that his current existence even matters. The intense declaration leaves Rai visibly uneasy about what Josuke might be planning to sacrifice. Resolved to bear the brunt of the enemy's curse alone, Josuke decides to press on towards the medical lecture Akafu is scheduled to give. Steering his resolve, he opens the door and steps out into the open air. The moment that he exits the vehicle though, the weaponized raindrops instantly pierce straight through Josuke's body. The catastrophic injuries cause him to collapse, losing consciousness almost immediately. Watching from inside the car, Rai notices that the localized onslaught stops the moment Josuke loses consciousness. When he reaches out, the remaining rain taps harmlessly against his open hand. As the officers then move in to violently apprehend him, a desperate Rai angrily screams at the police to call an ambulance for his partner. From here, Josuke is quickly loaded into an emergency vehicle and driven away, leaving a detained Rai in the dark about which medical facility he's been taken to, and whether or not Josuke will ultimately end up at TG University Hospital after all. One of the arresting officers mentions overhearing the name Josuke Higashikata and presses Rai for confirmation, warning him that a full-on police investigation will uncover the truth regardless. Rai, though, like the botany god he is, chooses to remain entirely silent. Meanwhile, in another part of Morio, Toru and Yasuo are relaxing on her front porch, trying to enjoy the afternoon. Gazing up at the afternoon sky towards the coordinates of the Perseus constellation, Toru reminisces about an old conversation where Yasuo remarked that electricity seems to spill out and fly into the air even without holes in the power lines. He reveals that her childhood insight directly inspired him to develop a wireless induction charging mechanism. Though every major tech corporation he approached ultimately rejected his invention, the project defined his youth. Toru confesses that he previously suffered from severe, paralyzing anxiety, which is what originally drove a wedge between them and caused their breakup. Dropping to one knee in front of her now, Toru earnestly proposes that they get back together, begging her to remember the genuine happiness they shared during their past relationship. Before Yasuo can formulate a response, her attention is hijacked by a digital alert on her smartphone. Utilizing Paisley Park, she monitors a security camera feed that briefly caught Rai purchasing supplies at a local store, though the tracking signal cuts out shortly after. As she desperately tries to re-establish the digital link to locate her allies, Toru cuts in, mentioning that he noticed her frantically chasing after Satoru back at the hospital. Offering to assist her investigation, he pulls up a collection of digital photos on his own device, finally giving Yasuo a clear, unblurred look at the head doctor's actual face. Just as the shock of the discovery settles in, the storm front finally reaches their coordinate location and the first heavy drops of rain begin to fall on the porch. The countdown to the highly anticipated fruit harvest now sits at exactly 4 hours. Yasuo and Toru both notice the oncoming rain and quickly start heading indoors to escape the downpour. The moment Yasuo brings up the digital photograph showing Mitsuba standing right next to the head doctor, Toru casually brushes it off. He explains that he took the snapshot as a simple commemorative photo just before a routine hospital examination, before immediately offering his full assistance to help her own investigation. Sensing an urgent need to act, Yasuo deploys Paisley Park directly into the telephone lines to scout ahead and firmly asks Toru to drive her straight to the Higashikata estate. As they prepare to leave, sirens wail in the background as a fleet of ambulances and police cars rush past them, heading towards a park on the other side of Morio. Back at the Higashikata house, Tsurugi opens the morning newspaper and discovers the horrifying article reporting the sudden deaths of Ojiro Sasame and Meiko Katani. The shock causes his face to violently distort and crack, mimicking the chilling symptoms that flared up after his frightening encounter with the mother and her baby at the fountain. Spotting her grandson fleeing the room in a blind panic, Mitsuba walks over and reads the murder report that caused Tsurugi's breakdown. Her eyes then widen as she spots an adjacent article detailing Josuke and Rai's new status as wanted fugitives. Deeply stricken by both reports, Mitsuba stands frozen, desperately pondering the terrifying web of coincidences that have continuously occurred around Tsurugi, Joban, and the elusive Satoru Akafu. Trying to calm her racing thoughts, she heads into the kitchen and begins chopping up a carrot for dinner, only to freeze when she spots Dr. Akafu quietly walking past the window. The mere mental acknowledgement of his presence instantly triggers the curse. The kitchen knife violently knocks off course, slicing 2 of her fingertips clean off her hand. Gasping in pain, Mitsuba quickly uses Awakening 3 Leaves vector arrows to force the severed skin back into place, reattaching her fingers instantly. However, in her frantic movement, she accidentally knocks over a bottle of cooking oil. The grease ignites, causing the stove fire to flare up violently, which rapidly overheats a boiling pot of water. Within seconds, a high-pressure blast of scalding water erupts from the pot, flying directly towards her face. Acting on pure instinct, Mitsuba manages to place another set of stand arrows, successfully deflecting the boiling torrent away. Hearing the chaotic crashing coming from the kitchen, a weak Tsurugi crawls into the room to see what's wrong, but as the weaponized rain above them begins to leak straight through the ceiling, a single, heavy droplet strikes the boy right above his nostrils, instantly blasting a bloody crater into his face. His limbs and spine begin to rapidly twist and contort in agonizing patterns. Fighting through the excruciating pain, Tsurugi looks up at his mother and explains that the hereditary rock disease has finally taken full hold of his body. Even so, he commands his mother not to worry, declaring that the Higashikata family will overcome any obstacles in their path before completely passing out on the floor. Motsuba wails in absolute anguish over her son's collapsed body, while Jobin looks on from the dark hallway in paralyzed horror, just as the rest of the oblivious Higashikata family rush into the kitchen to find out what caused the commotion. Meanwhile, at TG University Hospital, the elderly head doctor calmly walks through the front doors to prepare for his highly anticipated lecture on regenerative healing. In the secure medical wing, Josuke suddenly jolts back into consciousness. He immediately summons Soft and Wet, using a rapid strike to silently knock out the armed police guard stationed at his bedside. Josuke claims a small victory, knowing that by surviving the rain and waking up inside of this facility, he is now one step closer to a direct confrontation with Akafu. However, his relief is instantly shattered. Satoru's stand activates remotely in response to Josuke's lingering intent to capture the doctor. The invisible force takes a hold of the guard's limp, unconscious body, launching it through the air like a massive projectile directly into Josuke's chest. Outside of the facility, the promotional sign confirms that the keynote lecture is scheduled to take place on this very day, meaning that it's 2 days later from when we were last with people, and Josuke is actually woken up on the day of the Lokakaka harvest. As the high-profile lecture at TG University Hospital begins, a seriously wounded Josuke, battered from Wonder of U's latest brutal attack, painfully crawls his way out of his secure room, driven by a desperate need to track down the head doctor. On his way through the corridors, he is suddenly discovered by Holly Kira. Her mind clearly deteriorating, she mistakes him for her late son, Yoshikage. Pointing out the shocking severity of his physical wounds, she casually quizzes him on the exact size of Yoshikage's childhood pet, a Flemish giant rabbit named Cindy, whose aggressive bites had once caused a young Kira to undergo similar traumatic injuries. This also reminds me here of how he first came out as Josuke, and he was on the hospital bed waking up there and everything. He knew the exact sizes of animals and whatnot. I wonder if this is just like a trait from Kira. So I wonder if he does have some form of memories in a way, and we'll get to that later on, but I just don't know right now. As Josuke begins to question whether the woman standing before him is an actual reality or merely a hallucination brought on by blood loss, Holly gently takes his hand and begins leading him to a safer area of the facility. As she does, Josuke notices a bizarre, meticulous list of numbers and words written directly onto Holly's skin. She reveals that she wrote them herself to manually track the progression of the rock disease ravaging her body. Watching the stone-like texture creep up her arm to mark the number 120, Holly mathematically deduces that she has exactly 120 seconds left before she is forcefully thrown back into another deep coma. Determined to use her final moments of consciousness to help him, she guides Josuke towards research room A2 to treat his injuries. Meanwhile, inside of the crowded auditorium, Satoru Akafu takes the stage and proudly reveals his revolutionary breakthrough in regenerative medicine to the gathered press and colleagues. He goes on to elaborate that a 150-gram vial containing a substance dubbed Lokakaka 6251, he confidently explains that this formula will flawlessly cure any physical wound once injected into the patient's system. He presents data showing that the development team used mice and cattle as test subjects, boasting a 100% successful regeneration rate that left the animals completely satisfied and healthy. Satoru continues his presentation, noting that he is currently waiting for the official regulatory permission to fully detail the precise biological process behind the healing, before shifting the focus of his speech to a grand claim: how this exact medicine is capable of completely repairing the complex neural pathways of a person's brain. Back in the hidden laboratory, Holly fills Josuke in on the dark history of the hospital. She explains that she was systematically ordered to work less overtime right before the rock humans, Satoru Akafu included, joined the facility's official staff, and that their sudden presence was the direct, malicious cause of her health's rapid deterioration. She reveals that Tamaki Damo's coastal smuggling team were merely unwitting pawns used by the hospital staff, with their dangerous fruit-running operations serving as a ruthless recruitment trial for the syndicate. Holly then forcefully breaks into a secure storage cabinet and grabs a raw sample vial of Lokakaka 6251, explaining to Josuke that it can instantly mend any internal wound, though it carries a severe side effect. Whatever it heals will inevitably turn into stone through an equivalent exchange. Realizing that her time is up as her mind slips away, Holly crawls into a nearby hospital bed. With some of her final breaths, she warns Josuke that the head doctor possesses no true authentic face and emphasizes that he must never actively pursue him. Josuke fiercely vows with her though that he has no other choice to push forward. Desperate to heal his shattered body first, he drinks the Lokakaka 6251 solution. However, the curse of the exchange strikes instantly. His lips petrify into solid rock, sealing his mouth shut and making it impossible for him to swallow the remaining cure. Thinking fast, Holly manages to grab a second vial and pours the liquid directly into one of Josuke's deep open chest wounds to bypass his mouth. As she feels herself slipping away into a vegetative state, she leaves him with one final, crucial hypothesis regarding Satoru's stand. If Josuke can somehow manipulate the environment so that the head doctor is forced to pursue him instead, the logic of the Calamity ability will have no power over him. As Holly passes out into a deep coma, Josuke pulls himself up and weeps over her unresponsive body, contemplating whether the brief lucid mother he just witnessed was a real person or merely a fleeting dream. With his internal injuries successfully closed and healed by the medicine, he gently moves Holly to a more comfortable, hidden area of the research room. Standing tall, he declares that even though his identity is now legally Josuke, Holly will always be his mother. Summoning Soft and Wet, he unleashes a powerful blast to completely destroy the laboratory wall leading outside, vowing to do whatever it takes to break the curse and save his mother's life. While deep in thought regarding the safety of the new Lokakaka branch, Josuke waits inside Holly's hospital room. A courier from a local delivery service arrives at his location, and Josuke hands over a packaged parcel containing mystery contents. The courier expresses hesitation about accepting the delivery due to the unusual nature of the destination address, but his concerns vanish once Josuke compensates him with a substantial stack of cash. With the package sent, Josuke resolves to test Holly's parting theory. While actively chasing the head doctor brings certain doom, manipulating the circumstances so the doctor is forced to come to him should bypass the deadly curse entirely. With nothing else to do, he sits patiently inside the completely wrecked hospital room right beside the wall he previously demolished. Meanwhile, Yasuo pulls up to the Higashikata estate, determined to find the new Lokakaka branch for herself. Deploying Paisley Park, she hacks into Joshu's smartphone camera as he wanders through the halls to get inside of the main house. Joshu is currently searching the premises for his older brother, Jobin. However, he first happens upon a completely despondent Norisuke Higashikata sitting silently on the staircase. Joshu tries his best to encourage his father to join the rest of the family, but a sullen Norisuke simply retreats back upstairs towards his private office. Disturbed by the heavy, ominous atmosphere hanging over the household, Yasuo pushes her digital search even further. Peeking through a cracked door via the camera feed, she is horrified to spot Tsurugi looking exceptionally sick as the rock disease takes its toll. Acting quickly, she manipulates Joshu's surroundings to make his phone slip from his pocket, allowing Paisley Park to seamlessly leap over to the active mobile device inside of Tsurugi's bedroom. Tsurugi immediately senses Paisley Park's supernatural intrusion and sharply commands Yasuo to get out. He reveals that he purposefully disconnected his internet and shut down his phone specifically to block her out, knowing she would try to investigate. Undeterred, Yasuo directly confronts the boy, demanding to know the true location of the new Lokakaka plant. Before Tsurugi can even formulate a response, Jobin abruptly enters the room and snatches the phone from his son's hands. Recognizing the digital threat, Jobin immediately activates Speed King, superheating the smartphone's internal circuitry to trap Paisley Park before ruthlessly dropping the burning device straight into a toilet bowl. This brutal digital trap takes an immediate physical toll, causing water to violently erupt from a suffocating Yasuo's face. As Paisley Park is ruthlessly forced down the drain, Jobin Higashikata reassures his son that they will be able to harvest the new Lokakaka fruit very soon, confidently declaring that the Higashikata family will finally shine and prosper. He reaffirms that once they control this power, their bloodline will never again be forced to endure a tragic equivalent exchange to cure the hereditary rock disease. Meanwhile, a struggling Yasuo desperately tries to pull her drowning stand out of the toilet, calling out to the house for any sign of help. Monitoring the home security camera feed, Mitsuba notices Yasuo outside and is surprised to see her lurking near the estate for Tsurugi's sake. Wanting to check on him, Mitsuba enters her son's room, finding him in a terribly sickly state with her husband standing over him. Recognizing that Mitsuba has now walked into the room with Tsurugi, Yasuo projects her voice through Paisley Park from inside the adjacent bathroom, pleading with her to rescue the trapped stand. Approaching the toilet, a suspicious Mitsuba demands to know what Jobin has done. Jobin coldly dismisses her, telling her to ignore the phone entirely. Despite her initial hesitation and pity for Yasuo, Mitsuba prepares to leave her to her fate, but both women suddenly freeze as they notice Satoru Akafu standing directly outside of the house. They are completely baffled by his sudden appearance and immediately reminded of the absolute misfortune brought upon anyone who attempts to look directly at his face. Terrified by the head doctor's ominous presence, Mitsuba decides to abandon Yasuo completely and slams the toilet lid shut. Reeling from Mitsuba's betrayal, Yasuo tries to drag her physical body towards Satoru, but the escalating curse of calamity causes her to suffer a horrific fall that violently detaches her right arm, leaving her crying out for Josuke's help. Inside of the house, Jobin questions Mitsuba about the old man outside, demanding to know his true identity. She explains who he is while warning him about the fatal nature of his stand's ability. Determined to eliminate the digital evidence, Mitsuba goes to activate Awakening 3 leaves to flush Paisley Park away forever. However, the mere intent to interfere with the head doctor's pursuer causes the curse to backfire violently, piercing straight through her hand. The stray kinetic force tears a massive hole directly into the wall behind her, which just happens to be Jobin's beetle room, completely exposing the secret cactus sanctuary. Obviously alarmed by the destructive crash of Mitsuba's stand, the rest of the Higashikata family rush upstairs to investigate the commotion. Bursting into the shattered beetle room, the entire family stands frozen in absolute shock as they finally lay eyes on the hidden new plant, fully grown and perfectly ready for harvest. Following the commotion upstairs, Norisuke enters the room and discovers Tsurugi, Mitsuba, and Jobin standing over the toilet, actively letting Paisley Park drown. Spotting Yasuo's trapped stand, he immediately fishes the phone out of the water and demands to know what's happening. On the ground outside, a desperate Yasuo begs Norisuke to move the phone closer to an electrical outlet to save her. However, Jobin coldly pressures his father to throw the device right back into the water to secure their secrecy. Stranded on the grass outside, an immobilized Yasuo watches in dread as the head doctor stands nearby, patiently waiting for the next calamity to unfold. Inside, Jobin defends his actions, arguing that the Lokakaka must never fall into the wrong hands and that this specific plant is their only hope to permanently shatter the hereditary curse without requiring a human sacrifice. In this moment, Norisuke realizes just how far his son's worldview has diverged from his own. Intrigued yet cautious about the potential cure for the rock disease, Norisuke leans in to investigate the plant, catching a faint, foreign scent lingering on one of the fruits. Activating King Nothing, Norisuke tracks the origins of the unfamiliar smell, reconstructing a spectral visualization of Ojido Sasame escaping out of the window with the flower pot just days prior. The puzzle pieces instantly click together for him, linking this hidden pot plant directly to the recent news reports of Ojido and Meiko's gruesome deaths. As Tsurugi watches the truth unravel, his despair deepens and the physical symptoms of his disease visibly worsen. Sensing the horrifying truth, Norisuke turns to Jobin and demands to know exactly what he did to Ojido. Rather than answering, Jobin reaches out and plants Speed King directly onto Norisuke's neck, quietly begging his father for forgiveness as he chooses to forge his own path ahead. Quickly, he channels an intense burst of localized heat into Norisuke's body, triggering an instantaneous fatal heat stroke. Even as he shows immediate tearful remorse for the deed, Jobin aggressively blocks the rest of the family from stepping in to administer first aid, fiercely declaring that the household will be following his leadership from this moment forward. He then covers his father's limp body with a simple plastic tarp, informing everyone that the final harvest will take place at sundown. Finally, he then retrieves the phone containing Yasuo's stand, allowing a battered Paisley Park to escape into the circuitry and return to her. Though her consciousness is restored, Yasuo's physical injuries remain catastrophic and she bleeds out on the estate grounds, unable to do anything. Locked inside of a police holding cell, Rice sits in isolation, deeply irritating his cellmate with constant, low-voiced mumbling. Driven by sheer desperation, he reveals that he has managed to covertly swipe a cell phone and a small pocket knife directly from the precinct's evidence locker. He points out the small window, trying to convince his cellmate that an elusive figure is lingering right outside the station walls, serving as a physical manifestation of raw calamity energy. To prove that the supernatural threat is real, Momozuku stands up, and the unseen curse instantly strikes. The cell's single light bulb violently shatters into pieces. Scared, he frantically dials Josuke's number to warn him of the escalating danger, but before the call can connect, a plate of food sitting on the bench suddenly decomposes and bursts into a swarm of writhing maggots. Momozuku theorizes that this shadowy figure operates like a force of karmic retribution, generating an aura of destruction that scales directly with the past sins of anyone who sets eyes on him. Finally catching sight of the phantom outside, the cellmate panics, prompting Momozuku to reveal that he used the stolen phone to look up the man's criminal history. Turns out his cellmate is absolutely cooked on his Jeffrey, insert the last name, demonic vibe type shit. The moment the cellmate's horrific past is acknowledged, the aura of calamity instead targets him. In a flash, an invisible force slices open his neck, causing blood to quickly pool around him on the floor. Panicked guards rush into the cell and load the dying criminal into an ambulance bound for TG University Hospital, which is exactly what Momozuku had banked on. Using the chaos of the medical emergency as a cover, he slips past the guards and sneaks out into the crowded parking lot, firmly concluding that the persistent stalker is an automated stand of unparalleled scale. Meanwhile, a heavily injured Yasuo lies bleeding out on the grass just outside of the gates of the Higashikata estate, barely managing to dial Toru's number to beg him for help. Inside of the main house, Jobin brings his heel down on the waterlogged smartphone, completely crushing the device that had entrapped Paisley Park. Turning to his terrified family, he delivers a harsh lecture on the true, world-altering significance of this new fruit, fiercely swearing that they will defend the plant from outsiders at all costs. He reassures his crying mother and siblings that Nodosuke is not actually dead, but merely rendered unconscious by a controlled burst of heat. Under his strict commands now, they carry Nodosuke's limp body up to the second floor while scrambling to find a brand new hiding spot for the exposed flower pot. All the while, Tsurugi's physical condition continues to rapidly decline, his skin hardening into stone with everyone helpless to stop it. Suddenly, Mitsuba catches sight of the elderly head doctor walking past the bedroom corridor, and a freezing, invisible presence creeps into the room. Looking around, she spots the doctor's distorted reflection warping across the glass panes, the polished furniture, and various metallic surfaces. With a horrifying realization, she understands that this is a relentless, psychological attack designed to trick them into destroying themselves so the mastermind can simply step in and claim the prize. Jobin himself remains entirely blind to these hidden illusions, but as he catches a glimpse of the physical doctor approaching his doorway, his survival instincts take over. Summoning Speed King into the air, Jobin prepares to unleash a lethal, close-range strike to eliminate the intruder once and for all. Satoru Akafu, or the phantom entity mimicking him, abruptly dives beneath the bed sheets to evade the incoming assault. The moment Jobin rips the linen aside, he finds no trace of the doctor. Instead, a can of hairspray sits there slowly leaking. Instantly, it detonates under the pressure of the Calamity Curse, confusing Jobin even more. As the smoke clears, Mitsuba tries to make her husband understand the sheer gravity of the supernatural force, and how both Yasuo and Mamazuku are likely being terrorized by the exact same entity. She argues that their possession of the Lokakaka is the direct trigger for this unrelenting onslaught, but Jobin fiercely doubles down, refusing to surrender the plant that promises to save his bloodline. Desperate for situational awareness here, Jobin brings up the estate security feed, noticing that Toru has successfully arrived on the grounds to tend the mangled Yasuho. Suddenly though, Jobin begins coughing up a torrent of blood. Weakened and gasping for air, he tears open his shirt to reveal a horrific injury. A rigid plastic tube from the exploded hairspray can had launched straight into his chest like a bullet, piercing a major artery and serving as a sort of faucet to drain his life force. Drained now, he collapses to the floor, the impact driving the tube even deeper into his body. Crying out for his son with his final breaths, Jobin tumbles down the staircase. The coveted Lokakaka pot slips from his lifeless hands, rolling across the floor towards the garage as he dies at the bottom of the steps. Just outside of the property gates, Toru cycles through a few bangers on his iPod before deciding to jam out to The Wonder of You by Elvis Presley. Meanwhile, across town, the delivery man previously paid off by Josuke reaches his destination, handing over the mysterious parcel to an investigative reporter for Pangea Land. Armed with this new evidence, the reporter tracks down Satoru for a scheduled interview, cornering the elderly head doctor in a quiet hallway. The reporter confronts Akafu with a damning video recorded just 40 minutes prior, exposing a bedridden Holy Joe Starkera, the hospital's hidden research laboratory, and a physical sample of Lokakaka 6251 formula. With it laid out, the reporter accuses the university hospital of conducting highly illegal human trials on non-consenting patients. Akafu remains completely unfazed, mocking the reporter's presentation and calmly picking apart the logical holes in the accusation. As the confrontation escalates, the news guy suddenly notices that the acne on his face has vanished, replaced by a completely smooth texture. Before he can process what is happening, the sudden onset of the petrification causes his neck to violently snap, killing him in an instant. The stolen sample of 6251 drops from his hands as Akafu steps over his corpse and exits the building. Watching from the shadows of the hospital parking lot, Rice spots the head doctor making his departure. However, after he goes to leave, the doctor follows him, which in his eyes means he's also headed towards Josuke. Connecting all of these pieces of the puzzle together, Toru smiles to himself, realizing that Josuke has successfully flipped it so the head doctor is forced to pursue him. From here, there is exactly 2 hours and 11 minutes remaining before the final harvest. From the shadows, Rai watches the figure on its way to Josuke move through solid matter by effortlessly phasing through glass panels and structural columns before casually riding the escalator up to the second floor. As they draw closer, Mamazuku bears witness to Akafu's true form as a stand-like entity, not some old man. Sprinting ahead, Mamazuku is the first to reach the research laboratory, where Josuke waits in total calculated composure. Simultaneously back at the Higashikata estate, Toru abandons Yasuo and begins making his way directly towards the hidden location of the Lokakaka pot. Inside the hospital lab now, Mamazuku frantically warns Josuke that the head doctor is not a flesh and blood human, but an automated tracking stand. Unfazed, Josuke counters that Soft and Wet's unique properties will undoubtedly be enough to destroy the entity. However, both Toru and his stand instantly sense a strange, hazardous aura permeating the laboratory air. Sensing the shift in power, Toru steps out of the main house just as Joshu approaches a bleeding Yasuo, carrying the coveted Lokakaka plant right in his hands. I wonder what bro's gonna do with the plant there. Wary of a potential ambush, Wonder of You hesitates to cross the threshold into Josuke's room. Instead of a direct assault, the stand reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a bizarre folding screen containing a trapped organism. After placing the device on the floor and watching it seemingly merge into the lino, the device rapidly unfolds into a makeshift crane that, without a second's hesitation, swings a mechanical strike directly at Josuke. In a flash, Soft and Wet manages to deflect the brunt of the heavy strikes. However, Josuke is still weirdly cut on the arm. Nursing his bleeding arm, Josuke directly probes the entity, demanding to know if he actually possesses the new fruit. The stand's cold, calculating silence inadvertently confirms Josuke's suspicion. The mastermind does not have the plant. So jumping into a little bit of an explanatory rant on rock humans here, but biologically, rock human females are virtually identical to human women, and human men are entirely capable of reproducing with them. These mothers carry their offspring for a pregnancy that lasts only 6 months, giving birth exclusively during the warmer seasons. Immediately after childbirth, the mother abandons the newborn in the forest. Because the life expectancy of these infants is exceptionally low, they enter the world at an extremely small size. When a newborn is eventually targeted by a swarm of Asian giant hornets, it latches onto their insects without suffering any harm from their venom. Once carried back to the colony's nest, the microscopic child seeks out the queen, burrowing into the soft tissue of her body to take refuge. The young rock human survives in this parasitic state for 17 years, absorbing nutrition and subtly learning about the surrounding world. Upon reaching maturity, the rock human undergoes a sudden massive growth spurt, slaughtering the entire wasp colony before venturing out into human society. Toru possesses first-hand experience of this brutal life cycle, as after all, he is a rock human himself. This alternative evolutionary line traces back 4 billion years. While early life on Earth developed a carbon foundation, certain organisms based themselves on silicon, evolving seamlessly alongside carbon-based life forms. Should humanity ever fall, rock humans are destined to remain as the dominant species. They do not experience the human concept of love, viewing the natural geological formations of the earth as their true blessings, and they construct homes from specific stones to channel and supply themselves with greater power. Flowing into a flashback and clinging to Nodosuke in grief, a young Momozuke speaks fondly of his father's pear orchard and recounts the strange, unidentifiable bugs that had systematically destroyed the entire harvest. Standing among the mourners, a young Momozuke spots a strange man he doesn't recognize, though his grief prevents him from dwelling on the stranger's identity at the time. In the present day, Momozuke stares at the enemy and has a chilling realization. The mysterious man at his father's funeral was Satoru Akafu all along. Akafu finally sheds his human facade, definitively revealing himself to be the stand known as Wonder of You. All of a sudden, the parasitic rock insect that created the crane deconstructs itself before re-emerging back behind Josuke. The moment Josuke attempts to summon Soft and Wet to retaliate, a goopish substance violently spews from his eyes and mouth. Unable to do anything to defend himself, the rock creature tries to shoot a helpless Josuke, but Momozuke quickly intervenes, saving his ass by throwing his hand in between the attack. Calmly, Akafu then explains to the duo that the rock insect's trait triggers automatically whenever Josuke tries to escape or extend his physical joints. Having a sort of psychological goon sesh here, Akafu looks back on his past and the time he met Rai. He coldly reveals to him now that his father's tragic death years ago was not an accident, but a direct consequence of Wonder of You's inescapable calamity. The animal's asbestos abilities make it difficult for the pair to even attempt to attack Wonder of You. Despite Josuke's efforts to fend off the insect, Doo-doo-doo-dee-da-da-da wraps its string around his neck and begins flooding him with asbestos. Having successfully evaded the lethal trigger of the parasitic rock insect by utilizing his stand, doggy style, to unravel his body like ribbons across the ceiling without extending his joints, Rai Momozuke drops down and violently crushes Doo-doo-doo-dee-da-da-da into pieces. With the immediate threat neutralized, Momozuke uses his unraveled momentum to close the distance between himself and the enemy, forcing himself to within a mere 2 centimeters of the doctor's face. Wonder of You is visibly shaken by the unprecedented proximity, admitting that no one has ever managed to approach it so closely. However, the stand quickly recovers its composure, psychologically baiting Momozuke by recounting the tragic deaths of the man's parents, reaffirming that their demises were not mere accidents, but the deliberate work of the inescapable calamity. Enraged by the mockery of his family's tragedy, Mamazuku defies the warning signs and attempts to pierce the stand's brain with a high-velocity wire spun from his finger. Before the attack can connect, the absolute law of calamity bends the physics of the room, causing several of Josuke's own high-speed spinning soap bubbles, which had been set up as a latent trap, to violently redirect into Mamazuku instead. The unseen projectiles tear through Mamazuku's flesh, boring a massive, fatal hole directly through his chest and shoulders. Collapsing into a pool of his own blood, a dying Mamazuku uses his final moments to impart a revolutionary realization to a horrified Josuke. Examining the circular wounds on his body, Mamazuku deduces that Josuke's bubbles are not physical soap spheres at all, but rather infinitely thin lines rotating at an impossible velocity, which in turn create the illusion of a round shape. Because these lines possess a physical thickness of absolute zero, Mamazuku concludes that they technically do not exist within the boundaries of this physical world. Consequently, because they do not exist, they are entirely immune to the logic of calamity that governs all matter. Elsewhere, Toru stalks the perimeter of the Higashikata estate, idly snacking on live hornets that he caught using his rock human traits. Through the sensory link with his stand, a sudden wave of shock and confusion washes over him as he observes Josuke's bubbles, which are displaying the reality-defined physical properties of the spin. I love how the spin's making its reappearance after literally not getting mentioned for half of this freaking part of JoJo's. But either way, despite this unexpected development, Toru quickly shakes off his unease, remaining completely confident that his absolute mastery over the forces of calamity will guarantee his victory in the end. Simultaneously, a frantic Joshu stands over a heavily bleeding, one-armed Yasuo, loudly lamenting the horrific string of tragedies that has suddenly torn his family apart. The overwhelming stress causes him to suffer a violent nervous breakdown, and he begins repeatedly slamming his own fists into his face. Yasuo desperately begs Joshu to look past his panic and find either Josuke or Rai to help them, but he flatly refuses, hyper-focusing instead on a sudden desire to protect her himself. Driven by the need to be her savior, Joshu insists that Yasuo needs to eat one of the fully matured new Lokakaka fruits to restore her missing limb. Watching this from the shadows, an astonished Toru decides to step forward and reveal his presence. Rather than aggressively intervening to stop them from eating the fruit, he mockingly allows the exchange to proceed, eager to witness the exact medical and physical effects of this newly cultivated strain. Dude sounds like someone off Pineapple Express, just wanting to watch someone goon out on his new supply. But anyway, acting without a moment's hesitation, Yasuo consumes the new Lokakaka, causing a sudden surge of biological energy to bind her and Joshu's bodies together in a violent equivalent exchange. To Joshu's absolute terror and heartbreak, this is no romantic or spiritual union. As the fruit's curse takes hold, Yasuo's severed right arm completely grows back to its pristine original state, while his own matching arm violently withers away into a useless, petrified stalk. A wave of memory washes over Yasuo, taking her back 10 years to a childhood summer camp where her mother had abandoned her just to jet off to Okinawa with a new boyfriend. Left entirely to her own devices, a young Yasuo found herself targeted by the other children's relentless bullying and was written off as a complete nuisance by the camp counselors. It was during this isolating trip that she first crossed paths with a deeply suspicious boy who would turn out to be Toru. He approached Yasuo with a strange request, asking for help in tracking down an elderly medical doctor whom he secretly intended to impersonate. Utilizing the early manifestations of Paisley Park, she easily located the target for him. As a bizarre token of gratitude, Toru handed her a collection of unique, fire-starting rocks before turning on his heel and vanishing into the thick woods. Back in the grim reality of the present day, Yasuo marvels at the absolute pristine recovery of her physical body brought on by the new Lokakaka, even as the horrific trade-off manifests on a screaming Joshu, whose flesh absorbs every ounce of her accumulated catastrophic injuries. Stealing her own resolve, Yasuo turns her gaze to the tree line and directly confronts Toru, who is observing from the edge of the property. Completely unfazed, Toru coldly states his intention to walk away with the remaining new Lokakaka branch, bluntly warning her that the slightest intent to pursue or interfere with his exit will immediately trigger Wonder of You to bring a fatal calamity down upon her head. Refusing to back down, Yasuo rapidly formulates a counter-strategy and snatches Joshu's dropped smartphone to put her plan into motion. Watching her reach for the device though, a broken and volatile Joshu undergoes a sudden surge of bitter regret over surrendering his arm for her sake. Spurred into a violent mental breakdown when she admits that she's trying to contact Josuke, Joshu lunges forward to attack her. However, Yasuo's fingers move faster, successfully placing an emergency call to Kei Nijimura just before he can lay a hand on her. By actively bypassing Toru and shifting her focus to an ally, she successfully navigates around the direct trigger for his Calamity curse. On the other end of the line, Kei answers the urgent call, quickly cross-referencing Yasuo's frantic update with her own mother's medical notes to pin down Josuke's exact coordinate location at the hospital. High above the skies of Morio, a heavy metal paneling covering an airliner's emergency evacuation door detaches from the fuselage, plunging at terminal velocity towards the ground below. Meanwhile, back at the estate, a panicked Joshu works himself into an absolute frenzy before collapsing down onto the pavement. Yasuo stands alone, staring down an unyielding Toru as the looming presence of Wonder of You manifests to a single impending disaster. Across town at the university hospital, Kei successfully tracks down Josuke inside of the laboratory. Isolated in his room, Josuke begins to fundamentally grasp how the invisible lines of soft and wet can manipulate the explosive power of the spin. In a desperate attempt to force the enemy's hand, Josuke intentionally smashes several glass vials of the Loka Kaka medicine, hoping to provoke the stand into a reckless direct assault. However, the law of calamity turns the environment against him instantly. Shattered fragments of glass ricochet violently off the floor and slice deep into his own neck. Refusing to back down, Josuke swings a heavy kick at the enemy, but the localized curse forces his own protective bubbles to obstruct his path, causing him to lose his footing and fall backward, impaling his torso on a pile of sharp building debris. Yet, this calculated risk pays off in an unexpected way. Josuke's heavy fall creates a sudden rush of air that forces open a nearby cabinet drawer, meeting the exact condition required to summon Born this way into the room. Moving with blinding speed, the motorcycle stand unleashes a localized gaze of freezing wind and iced over soap bubbles directly at Wonder of You. To the absolute shock of both the automated stand and Toru, the logic-shattering attack completely bypasses the protective aura of Calamity, connecting squarely with and drawing blood from the mastermind for the very first time. Inside of the hospital laboratory, Josuke begins to truly understand the hidden nature of his stand, soft and wet, realizing there is more to his ability than he previously thought. A perplexed Wonder of You questions how it is even logically possible for Josuke to have bypassed his inescapable aura of Calamity. Just then, a severely injured Kei Nijimura bursts into the room, fighting through her own wounds to hand her cell phone directly to Josuke. As Josuke tries to comprehend the anomalous spinning projectiles of his own bubbles, Yasuo's Paisley Park manifests through the active mobile phone line, delivering a shocking revelation. The mastermind pulling the strings and controlling Wonder of You is none other than Toru. Reacting instantly to the exposed threat, Toru orders Wonder of You to retreat from the laboratory, shifting his entire focus towards forcefully taking the prized new Loka Kaka branch from Yasuo back at the estate. Toru advances towards Yasuo to seize the plant, completely ignoring a piece of plane debris that is drawing dangerously closer in the atmosphere above them. A desperate Joshu attempts to step in and intercept Toru, but the law of calamity strikes instantly. A mere falling leaf slices through the air with the precision of a razor, cleanly severing two of his fingers. Relaying these chaotic developments through the phone, a panicked Yasuo implores Josuke to aggressively pursue Wonder of You. Acting on her words, Josuke locks onto the target. Fully unleashing the hidden power of the spin, he fires a specialized bubble directly at the retreating stand, while an entirely separate, logic-defying bubble begins to flow naturally from his star-shaped birthmark. Falling back into the past, memories surface of the fateful moment when Josefumi Kujo and Yoshikage Kira merged together using the properties of the new fruit as they tumbled into a coastal chasm. Back in the present, Josuke fires his bubble at Wonder of You, fully realizing that these spheres embody the power of the spin, granting them the unique capability to transcend the logic of the opposing stand's calamities. However, the enemy stand successfully blocks the projectile by releasing a specialized rock insect known as Obladi Oblada. The small, token-shaped parasite burrows deeply into the back of Josuke's hand and begins to rapidly multiply the moment he attempts to pry it out. As Obladi Oblada spreads to cover more and more of Josuke's body, the falling aircraft debris draws dangerously closer to Yasuo, while Toru calmly walks away from her with the new branch secured in his hand. Refusing to let him slip away, Yasuo drives Paisley Park through every available digital pathway, forcing Wonder of You's retreat to shudder for a moment. That brief disruption is all Josuke needs to line up one last, decisive shot aimed directly at the face, the true source of the calamity. Just as the falling ceiling paneling above is about to crush both Yasuo and Joshu at the estate, Josuke fires a point-blank bubble directly at Wonder of You inside of the hospital. Unfortunately, the swarming Obladi Oblada manages to deflect the projectile, sending it flying harmlessly into a nearby wall. With the parasitic insect now covering the vast majority of his body, a weakened Josuke collapses heavily from the suffocating effects. At the same time, the plummeting panel is a mere fraction of a second away from impacting Joshua and Yasuo. Yet, in that desperate instant, a spin-infused bubble travels directly through the connected phone lines via Paisley Park's data pathways, erupting into the air and barreling straight towards an unsuspecting Toru. Two TG University hospital nurses stumble upon the absolute wreckage left behind by the chaotic clash between Josuke Higashikata and Wonder of You. They trace the destruction to a perfectly circular hole cleanly carved right through a vending machine and the heavy concrete wall behind it. Peeking into the corridor, they spot Josuke, whose body is entirely swarmed by the parasitic Oblada rock insects just as he painfully crawls his way into a nearby elevator. Meanwhile, back at the Higashikata estate, Yasuo braces for impact beneath a massive piece of falling plane paneling. At that exact microsecond, the spin-infused bubble launched from soft and wet rockets towards Toru. The projectile tears directly into Toru's side, launching him backward and leaving a massive, gaping puncture wound in his abdomen. With the logic of the curse disrupted, the massive aircraft panel veers off its course, smashing violently into the main Higashikata house instead of crushing Yasuo. The devastating structural collapse ripples through the estate, wounding all of the family members still trapped inside. Realizing that she has somehow survived the impossible onslaught, a breathless Yasuo screams out to Josuke through Joshu's active phone, but the suffocating multiplication of Oblada leaves Josuke completely incapacitated in the elevator. Across town at the clinic, Wonder of You, still maintaining its disguise as head doctor Satoru Akafu, replicates the exact bleeding torso wound suffered by its user. The entity hobbles down the corridor, violently utilizing the last of its localized calamity powers to strike down the nurses and prevent them from following him. As the elevator descends, Josuke finally musters the strength to respond to Yasuo. He explains to her that he was able to bypass the calamity and strike Toru because her Paisley Park successfully established a direct data bridge between his and Joshu's phones. He desperately implores her to aim the camera at Toru once more so he can channel another spin-infused projectile to finish him. Yasuo screams back in terror that Toru has no intention of fleeing. Instead, he is actively crawling toward her, greedily devouring the very last new Lokakaka fruit to save his own life. Recognizing that Toru's ultimate goal is to force an immediate equivalent exchange and absorb her healthy tissue to mend his shattered organs, Yasuo tries to back away as he rushes towards her. Joshua again attempts to intercept the rock human by summoning Nut King Call, but the lingering aura of calamity turns the environment against him. Heavy metal rain gutters detach from the roof and strike the young man with the force of an iron bar, leaving him bleeding heavily from his mouth and ears. With Toru cornering a defenseless Yasuo, Josuke yells through the receiver for Paisley Park to open the digital path one last time. To rid himself of the parasitic bugs, Josuke forces his body to plunge into an underground water bath to violently pry the Oblada off his skin. Just as Toru's hands clamp down on Yasuo, Paisley Park erupts from Joshu's screen and a logic-defying spin-infused bubble rockets out into the open air. The projectile punches straight into Toru's chest and neck, leaving him critically mangled and hovering on the brink of death. Yet, refusing to submit to defeat, the broken rock human drags his bleeding body across the pavement, directly crawling towards the long-absent matriarch of the Higashikata family, Kaito. Following his successful strike against Toru, a somber Josuke wanders through the heavily damaged hospital corridors. He quietly observes Holy Joestar resting in her medical bed before passing the motionless bodies of his fallen allies, Raima Mizuku and Kei Nijimura. Or, good old Jotaro, and I guess, she would have been Jotaro. With the clinic secured, Josuke exits the facility, charting a path directly towards the Higashikata estate to finish what was started. Back at the residence, Yasuo frantically tries to warn Kaito about the approaching phantom of Wonder of You. However, Kaito is completely detached from the immediate danger, focus locked instead on the fact that she had lovingly prepared Jobin's favourite meal. As Yasuo's warnings grow louder, Kaito's granddaughters Daya and Hato wander into the space and innocently ask when she arrived. Sensing the impending danger though, Kaito sharply orders the girls to stay away, demanding to be left alone with Jobin. Toru himself struggles to his feet, pulling a sharp tool from a scattered toolbox to point it menacingly at Kaito. Yasuo begs the matriarch to retreat towards the safety of the coastal cliffs, but Toru interrupts, delivering a cold, philosophical monologue. He remarks that a nearby rock remembers nothing but the ancient dreams of the landscape, completely indifferent to the human concept of winning or losing. Yet, he contrasts this with Jobin, who lies dead at the bottom of the stairs without ever accomplishing his grand goals, leaving his mother with nothing but empty dreams and lingering memories. In a swift counter-move, Kaito flings a barrage of playing cards at Toru, officially manifesting her stand, space trucking. The heavy cards slam down, pinning Toru firmly to the floor as the ominous form of Wonder of You manifests on the estate rooftop. Ignoring Yasuo's continuous panicking, Kaito openly taunts the crippled rock human, mockingly asking if he dares to touch her and trigger a fatal calamity. She clarifies that she has no interest in physically attacking him, rather she simply wants to explain exactly what her stand cards are concealing. She reveals that JoJolion had previously confessed everything to her regarding the grafted Lokakaka branch and its true capabilities. Standing there, Yasuo watches in bewilderment, noting that Kaito genuinely harbours no violent intent towards the enemy. Toru demands to know her true motive for revealing herself, to which Kaito responds that her ultimate goal is already decided, she merely needed to gauge the exact direction the wind was blowing. Suddenly, Toru and Yasuo gasp as they realise Kaito was preparing to pull something hidden right out from between her compressed cards. Tears stream down the mother's face as she falls back into the past though, remembering a private moment shared with her late son. Kaito stepped in to assist him. Instantly though, she sensed that a heavy secret was weighing on his mind. She urged him to cast aside his hesitation and trust her with the truth. Securing the door and peeking out the window, JoJolion confessed to her that a dangerous enemy would eventually target their home. He detailed a bizarre phenomenon where one of his Miami stag beetles miraculously regenerated a broken mandible while a neighbouring Hercules beetle suddenly died, its face violently warped through an equivalent exchange to repair the other insect's jaw. JoJolion then opened a nearby cabinet to reveal a potted cactus with a grafted branch, identifying it as the prize that Josuke, Mamazuku, and everyone else were desperately hunting for. When Kaito pressed him about the orchard fire, JoJolion explained that the rest of the world believed the branch was entirely consumed by the flames, and they had to maintain that lie at all costs. He noted that the public assumed the late poor Tom had successfully stolen the branch before his demise, but warned that far worse enemies would eventually come knocking. She asked if he was working alone, and JoJolion admitted that his young son, Tsurugi, was fully involved in the conspiracy, lamenting how heavy the psychological toll had been on the boy given that the family's rock disease curse was slated to trigger soon. Paralysed by the mounting pressure, JoJolion expressed a desperate desire to come clean to his father, Nodosuke. In response, Kaito sharply slapped him across the face, ordering him to stand on his own 2 feet. She reminded him that Nodosuke had never truly forgiven her past actions and argued that his rigid morals would only result in the plant falling into enemy hands. Kaito fiercely declared that this fruit was the key to securing the absolute future of their lineage, insisting that their family's ultimate prosperity was far more important than any human ethics. Telling her son how deeply proud she was of his ambition, she swore that they would break the family curse together. She then threw a handful of her space trucking cards around the cactus pot, explaining that they would perfectly conceal the plant if he ever needed to hide it, but instructed him to keep cultivating it in his bedroom for the time being. Back in the grim reality of the present, Toru watches in dread as Wonder of View looms directly behind the matriarch, demanding to know what exactly is trapped beneath her cards. Kaito coldly explains that the cards are carrying the full weight of the Higashikata family's generational curse, and that Toru is going to inherit it right now. Stepping forward, she reveals her grandson Tsurugi, whose body is heavily afflicted and petrifying from the advanced stages of the rock illness. Tsurugi's stone-like hand reaches out and makes direct physical contact with Toru, instantly initiating a forced biological equivalent exchange. Watching the horrific process begin, a stunned Yasuo cries out as the terrifying truth hits her. Kaito's mastermind play all along was to use Toru's dying body as the ultimate sacrifice to permanently cure Tsurugi. Honestly, Kaito came out of this story like top tier for me. You know, she started off like, girl murdered a child, and you know, like it kind of made sense why she did it and everything, and it wasn't really her fault to start with, it was kind of JoJolion. But you know, the mastermind of Kaito has been absolutely amazing to watch. Inside of the heavily damaged Higashikata home now, a wounded Mitsuba crawls through the splintered wreckage, frantically calling out for her son Tsurugi. Instead of finding him, her search leads to her sister-in-law, Hato and Daya, before she stumbles into the garage and discovers the lifeless, mangled body of her husband, JoJolion. Right there in the garage, a mortally wounded Toru undergoes a forced equivalent exchange with Tsurugi, completely ensnared by Kaito and her stand, space trucking. To expedite the biological trade-off, Kaito ruthlessly crushes the branch of the new Lokakaka directly over them, letting the sap drip into Tsurugi's mouth. The fruit's power instantly forces the generational rock disease out of the boy and onto Toru. Blindsided by absolute rage, the rock human attempts to launch a final strike against Kaito using Wonder of View, but the petrifying disease takes hold with horrifying speed. And just like with Yoshikage, both he and his stand begin to violently crumble and disintegrate. Desperate, Toru begs Kaito to spare his life, but when his pleas fail to move her, he turns to Yasuo, imploring his former lover for mercy. His desperate cries fall on deaf ears though. Yasuo just stands there frozen as Toru crumbles into useless dust, seemingly curing Tsurugi of his terminal curse. As Mitsuba rushes forward to tightly embrace her restored son, a fading Toru experiences a final, passing vision of a giant hornet, the very creature he had first clung to as a microscopic infant just to survive the wilderness. Quite sad, when you think about the lives that these rock humans live and how they just have no love for each other or anyone or anything, and it's probably because they were taught that from birth, they're left alone and they're just raised by themselves by wasps, as kind of like the queen wasps themselves. It is kind of sad when you think about it. As emergency sirens begin to wail in the distance, the gathered Higashikata family and Yasuo notice a horrifying new development. Kaito has been deeply stabbed in her right side by a small saw from a scattered toolbox. Because her action of crushing the new Lokakaka branch to save her grandson technically counted as a deliberate attack against Toru, the inescapable logic of calamity had triggered one last time. Kaito, of course, collapses onto the pavement, tearfully thinking of her family's future as her consciousness fades away to the sound of her daughters weeping. Through a somber, closing narration here, Yasuo reflects on the inherently tragic nature of the JoJolion story. She traces the history of the Higashikata family, noting how every single member had suffered, bled, and endured unique personal horrors in the relentless pursuit of their goals. Yet, looking at the battered and bloodied survivors standing amidst the ruins of the estate, she ultimately finds the scene to be a hopeful one. Against all odds, they had succeeded in shattering Tsurugi's fatal curse and preserving his life. As ambulances and fire trucks finally flood the property, Tsurugi checks on Nodosuke and makes a shocking discovery. The severe heat wound on his neck is actually just a minor burn. Jobin had deliberately held back his stand's power, as I mentioned earlier on, meaning that his father is likely to survive. The relief is instantly shattered though when Yasuo catches a terrifying glimpse of Wonder of You hiding underneath a nearby ambulance, and then appearing again within the folds of Nodosuke's medical blanket. Suddenly, violent rupturing blisters erupt across Nodosuke's face and neck as Wonder of You's physical hand begins to force its way out of the unconscious man's mouth. Yasuo realizes with absolute horror that even without Toru alive to anchor it, Wonder of You has survived as a rogue, autonomous manifestation of raw calamity. Just as Nodosuke's blisters begin to burst, Josuke arrives on the scene. His body bears the physical scars of the Lokakaka fruit exchange, yet he stands tall. Without hesitation, he immediately launches a decisive strike against the Phantom, unleashing his evolved stand, soft and wet, go beyond. The logic-defying invisible spin bubble tears straight through the entity, utterly destroying the avatar of calamity. With the nightmare finally over, Yasuo and Josuke tightly embrace, watching the most terrifying stand they had ever faced turn into harmless dust once and for all. Falling back into the past now, the story shifts to 1941 as Lucy Steele, now in her mid-60s, returns to the shores of Morio to launch a formal investigation into the enigmatic Lokakaka fruit. Upon arriving at the train station, her hired driver bluntly shows her a heavy bandage wrapped around his hand, making it perfectly clear that he has no intention of lifting her heavy bags. Seizing on her vulnerability, a nearby stranger steps up and offers a helping hand, only to immediately snatch her suitcase and sprint away into the crowd. Fortunately, a 17-year-old local youth named Fumi, who happens to be visiting the area with his girlfriend, stepped in to intercept the thief and successfully reclaimed Lucy's stolen luggage. Though Fumi initially declines the offer to stay and help the elderly woman with any further assistance, he quickly undergoes a frustrating realization. The fleeing thief managed to pickpocket his own wallet, completely ruining his plans to take his girlfriend out for a nice sushi dinner. Cornered by his empty pockets, he reluctantly agrees to act as Lucy's personal guide and bodyguard to earn enough money to salvage his date. As they travel, Lucy reveals to Fumi that she is a specialized operative representing the Speedwagon Foundation, explicitly clarifying that her organization operates entirely independent of local police forces or government intelligence. She elaborates that her specific fields of expertise lie in advanced botany and geomorphology, lightly mentioning in passing that she also remains single. Turning to the true purpose of her journey though, Lucy explains that she's been tracking reports of a miraculous, reality-defying plant known as the Lokakaka. Its properties are too extraordinary to dismiss, and she suspects the soil around the Higashikata estate shares a supernatural link to the legendary Devil's Palm. Hearing her destination, a worried Fumi tries to dissuade her, warning her of a local urban legend known as the Radio Gaga incident. He recounts a chilling event where a woman standing near a specific roadside guardrail inexplicably began talking to herself in a trance. She stripped off all of her clothes and walked out into the middle of the street before vanishing completely out into thin air. Undeterred by the ominous folklore behind it, Lucy insists on pressing forward into the fruit orchard anyway to discover what this thing could be. However, the dark legend proves all too real. The moment they stop to examine the terrain near the infamous roadside guardrail, her hired driver suddenly falls victim to the exact same hypnotic compulsion, wandering off into danger. Before Lucy can even process the driver's sudden disappearance, the environment turns hostile. Strands of a hidden threat emerge as she finds herself under the immediate assault from an unseen adversary. A predator entity, potentially a rock human or an enemy stand user, looking deep within the metal structure of the guardrail itself, its malicious eyes glaring out from the polished rivets. Lucy Steele desperately struggles as an unnatural force drags her towards the narrow gap of the guardrail. Trapped in the creature's grip, she gasps in horror at the sight of her driver's mangled remains, his lower torso completely torn away and his internal organs fully exposed. Just as Lucy is about to be pulled through the deadly plates, Fumi acts quickly, hurling his sandal to disrupt the assault and buy just enough time to pull her to safety. Standing there, Fumi stares in pure disbelief at the sentient, predatory structure. Lucy, coughing up blood from her injuries, apologizes for dragging him into the lethal complications of her Lokakaka investigation. Fumi tries to guide her back toward the vehicle to flee, but the entity launches another grotesque counterattack using the driver's reanimated corpse. Driven like a puppet, the barely conscious driver begs to be taken to a hospital, while the underlying monster uses him to mock the survivors. To free Lucy from the corpse's grip, Fumi delivers a heavy punch, only to be entangled in the driver's exposed organs. The force drags him towards the gap in the railing, and he braces himself against the metal to stop the slide. His shirt tears under the strain, and the corpse splits apart, yet a loop of viscera stays clenched around his neck. Spotting the star-shaped birthmark on his exposed shoulder, Lucy yells for Fumi to manifest his stand before he slips through those final centimeters into the gap. Unleashing a mass of thorn-covered vines, Fumi uses his ability to forcefully drive the car straight into the guardrail structure. Breaking the entity's hold, Fumi's attention is momentarily caught by a pair of metallic clackers inside the vehicle, but he quickly tosses them aside. He channels his vines into a ferocious stand rush, violently throwing the corrupted guardrail off the road and down into the lower fields. Carrying the injured Lucy on his back now, Fumi flees the area. At her questioning, he finally reveals his true identity to her. His full name is, of course, Joseph Joestar, the grandson of Johnny Joestar. As they run, Lucy spots a young Toru lurking in the distance with the Lokakaka plant and begs Joseph to stop, but he insists on prioritizing her life and pushes forward towards town. Following these events, Joseph would travel back to America under Lucy's guidance, settling there with her for years. He eventually marries a woman named Susie Q, and together they have a daughter named Holly. Back in the current day, Josuke and Yasuo continue through Morio and cross paths with Kiyomi Kujo, just as she drops her phone while carrying a newborn. Yasuo picks it up for her, and Josuke chooses not to reveal anything about himself, accepting the fact that he is a unique being created by the Wall-Eyes and not tied to anyone's past directly. After Kiyomi leaves, Yasuo admits she used Paisley Park to check the phone's data and found a gallery of old photos of Josephume, proof that she cared deeply for him. She also shares a passing detail that Josephume had coincidentally been named in honor of Joseph Joestar. The duo walks over to the Higashikata fruit parlor, where the surviving members of the Higashikata family are gathered. The family lively debates which cake they should purchase to celebrate Norisuke's upcoming discharge from the hospital, before the accumulated weight of their shared tragedies catches up to them, reducing absolutely everyone to tears. Turning to their newest member, the family unanimously agrees that Josuke should be the one to select the cake. Stepping away to grant them a private family moment, Yasuo watches from a distance. A single, joyful tear wells up in her eye as she witnesses Josuke finally finding a place where he belongs, surrounded by a family that truly loves him. Honestly, what a freaking amazing series. That's like another absolute banger from Araki, man. He never, ever seems to miss. Apart from, I ain't gonna say much, but part 6 wasn't my favorite, but that's just my personality. That's just me. I just didn't like part 6 for its own reasons. But apart from that, man, this guy just never misses. I can't wait to get into part 9. I'm gonna go straight from here into part 9, along with doing Kagurabaki as well. And I'm going to cover that on more of, the actual arc by arc style basis that we do get inside of JoJo. So there'll be a lot more JoJo's, specifically JoJolion's videos in the future that will cover like all of the arcs that have been, done so far. I don't think it's too many. I think it's probably only like 4 or 5, but also got that to look forward to. There were moments throughout the later parts of the series where I had to kind of cut down on what I included or what I didn't include just because of time restraints. Like, this took a little bit of time, as you guys could imagine, so obviously if you have managed to stick around to the very end of the video, if you are still here now and everything, make sure to subscribe and just leave a like if you haven't already, as it really truly does help and just pushes my content to a bunch of new amazing people. And if you want to get earlier access to even the full JoJolion story when I do release that, hopefully next week, it should be next week. I just want to go through and do some touch-ups, add in like the stand eye catches and stuff as I did with Steel Ball Run, you know, previously. So that'll take me a little bit of time, but it won't take me too much. Either way, I just want to thank everyone again. If you are still here, like honestly, sitting through, this will be a 2.5 hour video alone, I'd imagine. But I can't imagine how long this is going to be when I finish the entire series. It's probably going to be around 8 or 9 hours long. So if you have sat through all of that, thank you so much. And it means the world to me. I hope you all have a lovely day. But either way, for now, it's been your professional degenerate Diavolo, and I will see you all in a bit. Bye.